Hello.
Hi, Alex. Can you hear us finally?
Oh, she
Yes.
got in. Okay.
Hi,
Cool.
everybody. It's so good to see you. I was just sent an invitation with this link to join, so it's great to have made it in, and we'll be able to start on time. So as everybody settles in and gets ready for our symposium, please open up your chat and feel free to let us know where you're joining from. Tell us your name, tell us where you're coming from, and maybe something about the weather today where you are. Feel free to talk in the chat and get us going. We're hoping to have a very interactive chat today. And we'll be starting on the hour, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hi, Cecilia, welcome.
Oh, hi.
It's good to see you.
I know. I was in a presentation on teaching ethics, and I thought, oh my goodness.
I know, I was there as well. And Hillary, it's so good to see you. I'll be moderating today. I've always wanted to chat with you. And Tanner, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, of course, no problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah, me too. So it's 9 a.m. Pacific. We'd like to get this started right on time because we have so much to do today. And I'm so excited to start our symposium. So welcome, everyone who's here. Thank you so much for joining. This is the Symposium, Careers for Linguists, Linguists for Careers, organized by the Linguistics Beyond Academia Special Interest Group of the Linguistic Society of America. I'll be moderating our first panel today. My name is Alexandra Johnston. I'm currently the director of the Masters in Language and Communication program in the Department of Linguistics at Georgetown University. Before that, I spent most of my career outside of academia, as have most of our panelists who will be here today. I worked as a corporate trainer and as a nonprofit leader. My colleague Laurel Sutton is also here. She's our session organizer, and she will be moderating our chat today, along with other members of our special interest group. Looks like Emily is in the chat and getting us started with a very interactive chat. So just quickly to let you know about the Linguistics Beyond Academia Special Interest Group. This is a special interest group that provides information, guidance, and resources for linguistics students and faculty who are curious about job opportunities and career paths for people with training in linguistics and who want to know about careers outside of academia. So if you've ever asked yourself, or you've been asked, what can you do with a linguistics degree? Then you're in the right place. We've organized 3 panels today as part of this symposium, and they feature linguists who have forged careers for themselves in 3 very broad sectors: government, technology, and nonprofit organizations. And this is just to give you a sampling of the wide variety of careers and job opportunities that linguists can be quite competitive for with the training and skills that we have. Our first panel, featuring linguists who work in government, will run until the top of the hour, and then we'll have a 10-minute break to reset and get ready for our next panel on technology and phonetics. So this isn't going to be a research presentation symposium per se. It's going to be a collection of career stories, and you'll take away some tips about job seeking strategies, about ways to position and frame your skills that show employers outside of academia the value that you can bring to their organizations. And this is also your opportunity to learn from these linguists. You know, where are these jobs? How can I apply to them? What kind of skills do you need? What kind of training? So please pepper the chat with your questions, and we'll make sure that we ask our panelists what you're interested in. We'll also be posting resources and links in the chat as well. So you'll also take away a folder of resources that we've put together for you to help you in your job search or get you going thinking about ideas for your career path. I'd like to ask each panelist to start with a short 1 to 2 minute introduction. I will start with Tanner Call, then I'll go on to Hillary Harner, and I'll round up with Cecilia Castillo Ayometsi. So Tanner, I'm going to start with you, and I'd like to ask you to let us know your linguistic background. What degree do you have? What areas of linguistics did you specialize in? Where are you working currently? What's your position and scope of work?
Yeah, sounds great. So like Alex said, my name is Tanner Call. I got my undergraduate degree in linguistics, and then I got my master's degree at Georgetown at the program that Alex oversees. It's the Master's in Language and Communication. And I actually just graduated in 2019, so I am a recent graduate. But ever since I graduated, I have been working for the FBI in the language testing and assessment unit. So there I started as a contract language rater, and I've kind of taken on a few other roles and responsibilities over the past year or so. But the scope of my work, like I said, when I first started out, I was essentially part of a team that would help rate and assess examinees' language proficiency. So if the FBI or if the government needed someone to test someone's foreign language abilities, sorry, there's my dog right there. She really likes the window. Sorry about that. So I would essentially, when examinees take a battery of tests to test their proficiency in a foreign language, whether that's speaking, translating, writing, things like that, I'm part of the team that assesses those tests to assign an ILR score, the Interagency Language Roundtable score, which, if some of you are familiar with government work, you're familiar with that scale. But beyond doing language rating and assessment, my roles have expanded to do some sociolinguistic qualitative work as well, which I can discuss a little bit later. But it's a pretty wide scope of work. And like I said, I'm a recent graduate, but it's been good work so far.
Great. Thank you so much, Tanner. It's a great introduction. Hillary, can I throw to you, please?
Yeah. Hi, Hillary Harner. Nice to be chatting kind of with you guys. So yeah, I received my degree I finished it in 2016. I did a PhD also at Georgetown. I was in theoretical linguistics. I did semantics. And if you know semantics, I worked on modality, which is kind of niche. So after that, I was like, okay, where am I going to get a job? So I got a 1-year contract at Google. So I went out to California. I worked there for a year, learned a lot about like the tech world, Silicon Valley, Google itself, what software engineers actually know about language or don't know. And then I wanted to find a job that kind of needed a little bit more of what I knew from my PhD. So went on a job hunt for a few months, and I found this postdoc that I'm in right now, and I'm at the Naval Research Lab. So all of the military branches of the government have research labs devoted to them to work on their technology. So I'm in the AI section of the Navy's research lab, where I'm in a pretty interdisciplinary group. So I do kind of more cognitive science, basic research, and basically the idea is to, help build up general knowledge about human cognition for people who are working on AI. They need to know, if you want good AI, it has to look like humans. So you need to know how the humans think, and that's what I'm doing now.
That's so interesting. I can't wait to follow up. Thank you, Hillary. I'm going to turn now to Cecilia Castillo Ayometsi. Do you mind introducing yourself, please, Cecilia? And please take yourself off mute.
Thank you. So I'm Cecilia Castillo Ayometsi, and I am currently a Senior Workforce Diversity and Compliance Officer. I know the title sounds very fancy, but it has to do with policy analysis and monitoring of compliance. I have a master's and doctoral degrees in linguistics with a concentration in sociolinguistics at Georgetown University. My interest and my current research and work has been, and since I was a student, with theories of discourse analysis, narrative analysis, interaction and sociolinguistics, critical discourse analysis, and mediated discourse analysis. My training and my work has been influenced by the work of Ron Scollon, who was my mentor in graduate school, and his theories of mediated discourse analysis, nexus analysis, and intercultural communication. I got to experience the beginnings of geosemiotics and the study of linguistic landscapes, which I actually get to apply in my work. And I enjoyed the exposure to Crescent Van Leeuwen's research on multimodality and analysis of visual design and multimodal discourse analysis. The scope of my work is very big. It's still within linguistics, which is very nice. My main job is to demystify the conceptualization of language in this sector. Instead of taking it as a code, I always apply it as a complex semiotic system. The linguistics that are relevant to my work has to do with the importance of ethnography, analysis of interaction. I have a very robust toolkit that allows me to provide expertise and guidance on text and messaging to reach different migrant communities. The linguistic landscape work of Elana Shohami and Jackie Liu has been relevant also to my work. I have done a creative implementation of very unorthodox application of engagement in the community using appropriating cultural tools and discourse analysis and so far. I focus primarily on the human interaction. I see it as a community practice as opposed to see these monolithic group categories. Right now in my work, I am focusing on anti-discrimination in Title VI and policies that are based on protected categories such as race, color, and national origin. And that kind of demystification is very important to see those groups as a community of practice.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's good to hear all of these familiar names and references to our mentors' work. Great. So thank you for giving us that brief introduction on behalf of all three of you. I'd like to turn now to exactly how you found those first jobs post-graduation. We heard briefly about which jobs you've taken, but how exactly did you find those opportunities and turn them into a position, if you know what I mean? Tanner, could you tell us how you learned about the position as a contract rater, contract tester with the Language Testing and Assessment Unit at FBI?
Yeah, for sure. So I found out about the job. I was in my last semester at Georgetown, and the MLC, the linguistics department, had been putting on, like they always do, a variety of, I don't remember what they're called, but essentially they're career panels where different people who had connections to Georgetown's linguistics department would come in and give presentations about, what they're doing, something somewhat similar to this. Back then it was all in person. It seems so long ago, but so there was just quite a few. I think it was every month or every other month, someone would come in and talk about the work that they do. And there happened to be one month, the unit chief of the Language Testing and Assessment Unit and another employee, they both came in to give a presentation, and they also talked about how they were currently at the time looking for people to fill the contract language rating position. So after the presentation, I went and talked to them, got business cards. I think I connected via LinkedIn. And then it kind of just went from there. I went in, did an interview, and got the job, and it's been going since then.
And so it was pretty lucky that you had this personal connection, this in-person interaction with the head of the Language Testing and Assessment Unit. But otherwise, these jobs would be posted publicly, as federal jobs are, on the FBI website. Would they also be posted in usajobs.gov? How else could you find out about these open positions as contract testers and raters?
That's a really good question. Because it's a contract position, it's not an actual government employee. You're an independent contractor. I'm not sure where it would be posted. I'm trying to think back. Most of the people who work as contract raters right now have some sort of personal or professional connection with someone in the in our unit. So it's a lot of networking. I know sometimes that can be good, that can be bad for people, but that's how I think the majority of people that currently work as contract language raters in our unit have found the position.
Good. Thanks so much, Tanner. And currently you're also working on getting a security clearance as well through this contract position, right?
Yeah, so it did require partially, some of the work required a security clearance. I did get the security clearance, but I'm kind of in another process right now as well. So there's a little bit more to do with it, but yeah, you can do a lot of the work without a security clearance, but kind of the end goal for the unit chief wants everyone to down the line have a security clearance.
Yep. And that's a really valuable qualification to have for sure. Good way to get it through this contract position. Hillary, if I could turn to you, I'm really curious how you found out about your first job post-graduation, which was at Google, this one-year position that you held. How did you learn about it and how did you apply?
Yeah, Google, well, Linguists is basically the answer to how I found both my jobs, very indirectly for the second one, my current one. But Linguists, Google had posted that they were looking for linguists, and I saw that, and I thought, well, you know, this looks like a good job. I was getting a little bit just exhausted at the end of grad school, because that's what happens when you do a PhD, as we know. So I thought, okay, this doesn't look like, I'm not sure this would really be a thing I'd want to do long term, but you know, it's just like a little year gig, and to kind of learn some stuff, I'll apply to this. So yeah, I think Google's kind of interesting, just because like they don't need a cover letter from you, and I'm very like much trained to want to write a cover letter, but I think mostly I just sent an email, and then eventually, you know, I guess they weren't looking, or it got filled sooner than, you know, I had responded. So I didn't hear back from them for months, which was kind of okay, because I wasn't ready anyway. And then when I did hear back from them, they're like, oh, sorry about the holdup. You know, are you still interested? So I said yes, and then they sent me like a test that I took and it was a lot of like basic theoretical linguistics, like syntax, semantics. I think maybe there were some phonetics. I think it was mostly syntax and semantics. And they just give you novel sentences that you're never going to talk about in class, just because they're weird, but it's typical stuff that they're used to seeing at Google. So you fill out a test, demonstrate that you can think like a linguist. And then, yeah, that's how I got that job.
That ties in so well to our next panel, which will talk about that process of applying to a tech position. So thank you so much for foreshadowing this kind of application procedure.
Yeah.
You know, but then Hillary, why did you want to make that shift from Google to the Naval Research Lab?
I think you don't, at the time, I know that they've sort of shifted what linguists do at Google now, but at the time I felt like a PhD was kind of above and beyond what you really needed to do most of the work. So I wanted to find a job that wanted me to have a PhD, and I wasn't expecting that they wanted me to have a linguistics PhD, but I thought I can sell it to them. I've been at Google now. I know, you know, kind of what the state of the art is in the tech world. So I think I have some confidence now that I can sell myself to other people on like, here's why you need linguistics. You didn't know this, but you needed me. So I went on, I kind of had this idea that I would just like build this program for what I would do at a company. Like I would just cold call them and be like, you didn't know this, but you need a linguist, and here's everything I can do. So I started to make this just big list of people who work on language, companies that work on language, because I got this impression that most of these companies do not have any linguists working for them. So I started to make this really big list, and then I, you know, supplemented it by just going through Linguist list, just going like through the years. I was looking at like who has hired linguists, who knows that linguists exist, who's looking to hire them. So I made this giant list, and then I found, I think this is the way it happened, I don't totally remember, but I found this posting from the Naval Research Lab, and it was years ago. But I was like, oh, that's interesting. There's a I didn't know that there was any military research labs. But I found that, I thought, okay, that's interesting. So then I Googled around and I went to NRL's actual webpage and I found this one guy who was like a section head. He actually had a degree in linguistics, a PhD. And I was like, oh, wow, like he's the guy I should be emailing. So this was the first place that I cold called. I just sent an email and I was like, hi, I worked as a linguist and here's how helpful linguists are in companies. I can give you actual stats of how we helped improve Google search. Like, you know, you should hire me. I see you're a linguist, so, you know, you have some confidence in this, I'm sure. And I got an email back within like an hour and the guy was like, he became my boss. He said, oh, you know, Dennis doesn't work here anymore, but I'm the section head. He's not the section head anymore. But yeah, I'd like to interview you. You know, when do you want to meet? Like, I can meet this week if you want. So of this massive list of all these places I had compiled, I never went any further into the list because I had an interview with him and it seemed like a cool opportunity. And yeah, so that's how I got it.
I love that you took that chance, Hillary, that you did the cold email pitch and that it worked so well for you. That is one of these pathways to a position. That's fantastic. I mean, even without knowing anybody there, you were able to present your skills in such a way using, quantitative measures, using data that showed what you could offer of value to this employer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's what a great career story. Cecilia, I'm going to turn to you now and find out from you, how did you find your first job in local government, right?
Yes, so it's very interesting because my story is very different. I was actually offered the job and I was invited to the Office of Latino Affairs, which is part of the Executive Office of the Mayor. And right there, they say, would you be interested to work with us? You have the job, which was shocking. But let me tell you a little bit of how that came about. So I didn't look for a job. I was not looking for a job, but through my training and while I was a student at Georgetown, I actually did a lot of volunteer work because of my interest. So actually, I was very much interested in the different linguistic minorities living in the US. So during my graduate training, I volunteered a lot with different organizations as an interpreter, teacher. I did research for the Department of Human Services. During the sniper attacks, I actually interviewed people and we wrote a report on it. And then that kind of exposed me to know individuals working in that area. So workers or nonprofit organizations or government. And I guess one of the things was that in a way I was applying my skills. I was very much trained into ethnographic work on undocumented immigrants. And so actually my skill set of knowing a language and being a bilingual individual also helped, but mostly my linguistic toolkit. Realistically, all the choices of what I ended up here or my current career really reflects the choices and the opportunities that I took. I always work on issues of social justice because I was interested on that. I was very much influenced by the work of Ron. So I knew what I wanted and I got involved in what I wanted. And this opportunity to work outside academia or outside the environment of the university gave me immediately the opportunity to, after I finished my PhD, to work with these organizations. And as I said, somebody at the Office of the Mayor actually called me and asked me to come and visit them. And I talked to them, they introduced me to everybody. The director right there said, we want to hire you. And I didn't know what to say. I'm not looking for a job. So I actually went back to my mentor and I told him, what do you think? I don't know, I want to be in academia, I want to be a professor. And he said to me, give it a try. If you don't like it, you can go back. It has been 16 years that I took that step. So That's always very important. However, I have been in positions of hiring people. I have hired a lot of individuals, and a lot of people come with PhDs, masters, and so far. I can give you an advice that actually I got to see, and that is that we have a very important toolkit that is ethnography. So take your job search as an ethnographic piece of work. You need to actually, in the terms of Riley, you know the know-how. So imagine that you are about to enter a different community of practice. So you need to know how it works, find out how the process of hiring is, check the human resources. There is a lot in the case of WMATA, which is a big organization. There is a department on talent acquisition that specializes in hiring individuals that belong to minority groups, such as women, LGBTQ individuals, visually impaired individuals, individuals with disabilities. So they are departments, complete departments that are searching for individuals that belong to those different communities, and especially high-level skilled individuals, which could have PhDs or law degrees or master's degree. So take it as an ethnography, find out how the institution work. Be careful also how you approach people. I always get people approaching me as if I were able to give them a job. I can't. Also, learn the appropriate process. You know, you don't do a cold message telling, I have received cold messages when they say, oh, I want to meet you because you're a wonderful sociologist. So do a little bit of research and know how to reach out to people. The other thing that I can tell you is the first job outside the academic environment is the hardest. Once you get in, you will have the opportunity to build your career. And the other thing that I want to remind you is, do not just take any job. Take one that you would enjoy. You may not get it immediately, but at least seek it. And seek something that has to do with you, with what you bring. Take your work life as a journey, and the direction of your journey is marked by what you like to try, what would you like to do. And begin with a job that is in the step and going into the right direction of your interests and desires. I always remember Ron telling me, don't just take any job, you become what you do. And if you don't like your job and you hate your job, you will hate yourself. And sometimes that happens to us when we had to work, you know, because in graduate school, sometimes people need to do some sort of job, and then you become an expert, and that's the only possibility that you have when you finish. So in my case, I was lucky to seek what I really wanted to do and to know people, and then people, I guess, were interested in me and then literally offered me the job. My decision was whether or not to go in that direction or not.
I think what you're highlighting too, Cecilia, is that in terms of finding a job that suits your interests, is that you went about it through such a rich, building off of a rich personal history of volunteering, of following those interests that were so close to your heart, of working with refugee, migrant, undocumented immigrant communities in the Washington, D.C. area. And because you were doing things that you were so interested in, working on social justice issues in the community, you naturally, you know, as a result of those actions, met people who then were able to, you know, connect you with these other opportunities that never crossed your mind.
And also to add to that, the fact that you're doing something that you enjoy and that is matches your interest and of course your skill set, right? So they will know you for that, and they will say, you know what, we need somebody like you. The caveat, and that's something that I will put a word on being careful with this, is the symbolic capital that your PhD brings to these institutions. Institutions, it's very prestigious for institutions to hire a PhD, but the fact that they don't know your skill set, sometimes they don't know what to do with you. Also, it's advantageous to you because in a way, this institution they like your prestigious credentials and also the university that you are connected to. But it also could be a vulnerability because when you enter the institution as a community of practice, people within the team may be feeling threatened by you. I have seen students of PhD that have entered institutions that I work with, and they are unable to transfer that to become culturally competent in a new institution. They still bring these practices of being a student. And as a student, you are being told that you're wonderful sometimes, which is not necessarily true. So, or you don't know everything. So learn how to become part of that community and also learn how to you bring value to the institution and no saying, actually hire me because I'm important to you, but actually with your skill set, create initiatives, establish something that they haven't seen, but don't give them a lecture in linguistics. They don't need that. What you need to explain is what is it that you are doing and how could better processes of creating initiatives. And that's something that you learn over time, and that's how you build your, what I call your toolbox kit, because you then apply new skill set to your own training and experience.
Yeah, exactly. You raise a good point that the doctoral degree is not an end, it's a beginning of being a lifelong learner and of adapting to the new environments where you find yourself in your career. And you do have to learn how to balance the knowledge and the skills that you bring with how much you need to learn in a new community of practice in whatever sector that you go into. Mm-hmm. As far as the values and the skills that you bring as a linguist, Lisa Dashman has a question for all of you. Could you elaborate more on what it means to think like a linguist? How can you articulate what value linguists do bring in terms of how we are trained to think? And what are employers looking for in terms of what do they need us to solve? What is it about our training that is valuable? So maybe Hillary, it may have been you who mentioned that, like thinking like a linguist. What's really salient about that?
Yeah, I was wondering if I had said that phrase. Yeah, so right. So I'm a postdoc, which means I'm around a lot of people who have transitioned from the postdoc position onto permanent research at the lab. So, with PhDs and masters and lots of different backgrounds, like a lot of computer science there. And so I was at lunch one time with a group of coworkers, and I said, "Oh yeah, like I think like a linguist." I guess this is a phrase I use not knowing it. And afterwards, he's like, "Well, what does that mean?" And he's like, "Oh, I have this problem I'm working on. Like, do you want to talk about it?" And so I was like, "Yeah, well, here's what I would do. Like, so you want to outline like the situations like where you would need to like maneuver out of this." He's working on some like coding problem or a problem ultimately that he wants to code into a system. I said, so how about you, like, what I would do is I would delineate like all the times that you're going to, like all the different scenarios you could have and then how you're going to work out of them. Because, as a theoretical linguist, as a semanticist, what I do is I sit there and I'm like, what are all the possible ways you could use this word? And then let's come up with the meaning of this word behind all of these possible ways to use it. So I'm like, what are all the possible situations? And then how can you, design a system that would get you out of these possible situations? And he's like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, that's not how I think about it at all. Like, as a computer scientist, he would just want to go look at the data and then like mine the data for what's there. And I'm like, you don't need to mine the data. You can just make the data up. Like, that's what linguists are really good at, right? Because like we're used to it because we can produce all the language we want to study, depending on what you want to study. So that is one way that I think I've noticed a difference in that. And there was another time where another coworker was like presenting on her research and she's like, oh, I don't know how to like code. She's doing just more like psychology, but then of course you often are looking at psychology through language. So she's like, here's like the data people have produced and I don't know what to do with this. Like, are they using these verbs or not? I'm like, well, this is a case of ellipsis. Like, this is ellipsis every time. So, this is a linguistic like fact that you can talk about. Like, so there's times where people are, a lot of times, in technology or AI or whatever, people are looking at language to understand something, but they don't really know much about language. That wasn't the case with the first example I was talking about, but my thinking like a linguist of, let's just talk about all these possible scenarios. That was a case where I felt like it helped. And then anytime people are looking at language, they often don't have terms for the phenomena in language that they're running across. And I had one other example, but oh, right. And another thing is too, sometimes people, they've been talking about these ideas and they're like, oh, I don't know, like sort of a theoretical framework I can fit these ideas into. And if you studied theoretical linguistics, you've studied lots of theories and you're like, this sounds a lot like optimality theory. Like, why don't you use that? Like theories that you've studied in linguistics, while they have been catered to and like built on language, a lot of times they are helpful in other domains. So those are a few examples of times that I felt like, yeah, I'm glad I know linguistics.
Oh, well, that's so interesting. And speaking of knowing linguistics, what areas of specialization or coursework that you took have proven to be especially useful in the work that you do now? I think I'll turn to Tanner for this because you're closest to your coursework and can see how in this past year or so, what aspects, looking back, what has been most useful for you in your current position?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I started out as a contract language rater, and I've kind of taken on a few different roles. I helped do test development, and then I also mentioned some of the sociolinguistic qualitative research that I've been working on. And I think that for me, some of the most impactful courses that I draw from were the discourse analysis courses. So I think it's conversation and narrative, specifically to the MLC program. But the program, kind of like Hillary was mentioning, the courses that give you really clear linguistic concepts and linguistic phenomena that you can sort of learn and build research ideas around. And so I'm specifically thinking about a project that I've been working on at the LTAU, where I was able to draw upon the concepts of Gricean maxims, for example. We were able to talk about how that applies to the type of speaker that someone is or how well they can speak a certain language. And I was able to take those concepts of Gricean maxims that I had learned in my undergrad, but we sort of built upon in my master's program. And we talked about how they sort of applied to this table, or I guess the tool that we've been using to analyze people. So any courses that really, I think all the courses that I took at Georgetown were helpful and effective, but the ones that really give you sort of like specific terms or theories or models that you can really use to apply to real world data. And that's something that I would suggest as well for anyone as a student right now in a master's program, bachelor's, whatever it may be. When you are in a course that you're taking, to do your best to, if you have a research project, for example, at the end of the semester, to really try to apply what you've learned to real world scenarios. Take data that exists in real world. I remember for one class, I took the victim impact statements from the Larry Nassar case, and I used that to do some analysis. So I would just suggest really trying to apply everything you can to real world scenarios, because not only do you have experiences that you can then draw upon when you do job interviews, but you can also see in real life how linguistic concepts can apply to real world data.
Great, thank you so much. We had a question come in too about, turning just from coursework preparation from now to degree preparation. where do you see a doctoral degree being of use? Cecilia has pointed out that it can be advantageous, but certainly there are areas where it is not needed and sometimes not as advantageous. So what areas, positions in your organization do you see as requiring a PhD or being, perfectly open to people with bachelor's training in linguistics? Maybe Hillary, I could start with you. You mentioned that your section chief had a PhD in linguistics. Certainly you do. What about other linguists who work in the Naval Research Lab?
Well, he has since retired, so I am now the only linguist there. But yeah, so definitely. So I'm a postdoc. So you have to have a PhD. The Naval Research Lab likes to have postdocs to kind of test people out, see if they like them. They're pretty nice because they're 3-year positions, which is a very generous time frame. And yeah, it's a way for them to find out if they like you and if they want to take you on full time as a proper government employee, because right now I'm a contractor. And it's also a way for you to figure out, do you want to be here, long term? So they sometimes will hire people not going through the postdoc process. So you could have a master's and get a job there. I think it would be a lot harder as a linguist to get a linguist with a master's to get a full-time job bypassing any sort of postdoc, because I think just because it's not as well understood, people aren't as confident that they would know how to use you. And so a PhD does come with more clout, at a research institution like this. So yeah, I need it for my postdoc. At Google, I would say that a bachelor's was fine. There were plenty of people there who just had bachelor's. I think a few had masters. At the time I started, I was the first PhD, but then other PhDs came. But I mean, the real question is not, should I get a PhD? Will that help me get a job? The question is, do you want to get a PhD? And afterwards, you find the jobs that fit with that. Because I think, what a range of, we'll hear throughout all of these talks is that you can get a job with whatever your degree is, and it's going to fit that degree. So get a PhD if you want it.
Yeah, and that also comes with certain questions of return on investment and years away from the workforce, and so many personal questions that you have to balance. Tanner, I think for your entry into FBI, into federal agency, what degree level is necessary?
So for my specific job, the contract language rater, I don't think they have a specific degree that you need to have. I know that all of the contract language raters have some sort of language background. So one was an English professor, one was an editor. I obviously am a linguist, but I don't think there's any hard requirements for the degrees. But I do know that when you're looking at FBI jobs or the USA jobs as well, they will very clearly outline what sort of education and training you're supposed to have. So it's pretty straightforward when you're looking at applications on the government's website, what they want you to have.
Yep, very straightforward. Cecilia, how about in your office, in your first position, what would you say were the educational requirements for many of those jobs in advocacy and working with the communities in Washington, D.C.?
I don't think, and I think, I'm trying to answer this question this way. I think the degree of PhD gives you certain skills that you have honed over a longer period of time. So you have skills that are very important, such as good writing. Maybe a little bit too high-end kind of writing, but you also know how to do research. You know how to resolve a problem. You have finished a very long process of putting together a huge research project. You are very much committed to work and you can deliver hopefully on time. I think in the institutions that I have been working, which is government, the local government, and at the level of the executive office, they do value the skill set and it could be found within a master's degree or a PhD. In my personal experience, PhDs, individuals that are doing some sort of work, are able to implement initiatives where they have a long-term kind of process. One of the things that you learn really quickly is to acquire additional skills such as management, project management, contract management, administration, and what is that, employee kind of management, right? So there is no per se, actually, I've been working for 16 years outside academia. I have met a good number of people that have PhDs, and they are very much implementing new initiatives, and they bring theories. A lot of human resources people have PhDs, and they get into a very specific kind of human behavior and so forth. What else I could say about it? The other thing is the fact that you really, the difficult thing is to not lecture. I mean, to get away from being a professor, but actually apply the theories and methodologies that you know, and make it accessible to them. In Bakhtinian terms, you are learning social languages. So you go from academia, which is, you know, we speak with certain specific terminology. You are not going to say, okay, let me show you speech act theory, right? No, you don't. You just explain the phenomenon and you say there are these tools within linguistics that could address the situation, and this is how I did it. And in that way, you also share your knowledge, but you become valuable to be able to analyze something very specific. I was listening to Hillary. I never had that experience of really applying very concrete, semantic terminology or anything like that. But I can give you an example of an application of what it was, ethnographic work and analysis of human interaction by applying ethnography for about 7 months and looking at particular sites in government to see how they serve individuals that didn't speak the language. So I sent my interns who were anthropology and linguistic students. I have master's and PhD students to do ethnographic work. And with that information over a period of 7 months, we were able to modify the site to follow how people actually behave and know how the institution have organized the site or the setting. And then we were able to implement signage in language to be able to make sure that the individual did what the institution wanted to do, to take action. And just in that, I applied ethnography, I applied interactional sociolinguistics, I applied narrative analysis, discourse analysis, and visual semiotics. But I didn't present it like that. I was able to present the actual result just with the information that the institution needed to do and had to implement it. So when you bring these tools, I think in my experience, people really get to see PhDs, in my case, linguist. I can tell you that after my 5th year in another department, the Office on Asian Pacific Islander Affairs, which also serves individuals that are Asian immigrants, they requested to have a PhD in linguistics for the language access coordinator after they got to see the work that was able to do with the agencies. So in a way, you also see yourself as a door opener for others. And again, as I said at the beginning, Skolon was so influential in my life. And he always said to me, be responsible with your training. Bring it about and keep it with it, because institutions frequently may just justify some things because you have a PhD, but you are responsible to bring what you really know and to be ethical about it.
Very good point about ethics and making sure that you can stand behind the work that you do, making sure that you you fit with that job. Can I ask, can you think back to some key terms? We're talking about how you shouldn't lecture, you shouldn't use a lot of linguistic terminology when you are describing what you can do or the value that you bring. Can you think of some almost translations of key terms that might be useful, of some of our technical terms in linguistics that will translate to work in other areas in the federal government? Ways that you would write about your skills on your resume. What were some ways that you reframed your resume to highlight your training, your background? You think back to that, even though Cecilia didn't necessarily have the most typical application process and she was offered a job on the spot. But, you know, one of the points there is that you can always ask for more time, never feel pressure to accept a job on the spot should you be so lucky. Ask for time, that's perfectly fine. But as far as reframing a resume, what can you recommend to some of the students and faculty listening?
I might give it a shot, and just because I've had experience hiring, follow the practices of the institution. And that's what I mean as taking this as an ethnographic task. A lot of organizations, especially the large ones, as I said, they have human resources and they have a department that is called talent acquisition. In talent acquisition, they have what they call recruiters. And they have different levels of individuals that will able to identify what they call talent. Use platforms like LinkedIn. Actually, I was surprised when I actually started working at Metro, and those people that I mentioned that are departments specifically to scout talent, they will look into your LinkedIn account and they will reach out to you. So don't ignore them because they are paying attention to you. So this is what I would recommend. In general, the practices that you have a resume, right? You may have an academic resume, keep it, because hopefully, even if you work in outside the university walls, you will be continuing active in terms of researching, investigation, and so forth. So keep that one. And then create one specific to the business or the sector that you're working or you're applying to. And as I said, this is from my experience as a hiring individual. But be very specific to what the job description stipulates. Again, ethnographic thinking. I'm sure many of you, when you see those applications, especially those descriptions of what is very intimidating, the format in terms of the requirements and the scope of work. There are many positions that require 10 years of experience. So getting early involved in those areas helps a lot. Even if you don't get paid, you have the experience. So have those copies, but also use those platforms as LinkedIn as your portfolio, where you put everything, where you put your initiatives, where you can link to, if you did a video, if you did an analysis, if you did some sort of ethnographic research, so that those particular recruiters can go and look for you there. Those recruiters are your gatekeepers. Actually, those are the ones that are going to send me 10 people to interview. I have no control of what I would like to, I don't go and recruit myself. So in that sense, be honest in terms of what you bring to the position. Choose a position that you can do. So if you see 10 years experience and you just graduated, don't even try, you know. And so, but because of the ethnographic work that you're doing, hopefully you are able to connect to one of those individuals and ask all the questions you want. So you know what is the process. You know how to deconstruct that particular overwhelming description, job description. You know the format of the resume if that's what they want. So in that sense, you make it easier for the person that is looking at your resume. I remember in graduate school, I was always told, you know, engagement in the first paragraph. So imagine I'm traveling, my mentor always said, I'm traveling from here to Alaska and I need to read 20 papers. So how do you engage me? It has to be, how do you engage me, right? In the first paragraph. So make it succinct, clear. By that moment that you actually submit those kind of documents for applying for a job, you already know what to do and how to do it. To me, that's always wonderful. I see people with PhDs and they have a wonderful presentation on themselves and the resume, and I immediately want to know what the person would like to do in my unit. So,
Yes.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, Alex, for me, I was just looking back at some of my cover letters, and I used words like qualitative analysis, research, deep data analysis. It really depends on the field that you're and the job you're applying to. But I think kind of reiterating a theme that's popped up in this panel so far is you really want to look at the job you're applying to, because virtually every job will have a pretty in-depth description, and use your language skills to tailor your abilities and your experiences using a specific verbiage that was in the job description. That's something that I would really suggest. So if the job asks for someone who is detail oriented and is able to conduct data or research on complex data, use words like complex data, deep data analysis, detail oriented. Really tailor all of your application material to the specific verbiage of the job post, because it's just going to help you get your foot in the door. So I think beyond just kind of finding key words that you can sort of blast to every job description, really take some time to customize and tailor your application material to specific jobs.
Exactly. So, the theme here too is that part of thinking like a linguist is really being sensitive to language use by the specific audience that you are trying to speak with, the audience of your future employer or of those recruiters. You need to use the language that they use, pick up on the key terms that they're using frequently, and see how you can translate your own skills using the terms that they use, so that they will recognize you. They will recognize that you have the skills that they're looking for. If in fact you do. Again, this is all being truthful and honest about what you bring to the table. I'd like to take the last 3 minutes of the panel to just kind of see if you have any last words of advice for those who are listening, students and faculty who are curious about finding these jobs and positioning themselves for jobs in the government federal agency area. Hillary, may I start with you and see what you might leave our audience with today?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of uncharted territory was how I felt when I was looking. But, take that as a challenge and a way to have fun. You a lot of times might get to be the person who tells hundreds of people what it is to be a linguist. So, and we know that linguistics is an incredibly broad, diverse field with, any linguist is going to give you a different answer of what linguistics is. But you get to be the person who's their spokesman. So have fun with that. And yeah, I mean, find ways to build your confidence in what you know. For me, like I said, having a contract position at Google for a year was enough to give me confidence to start kind of cold calling people and telling them what I know. So find ways to, understand what you know, how it fits into the scope of what is being done out there in the workplace, and have fun finding a good fit.
Great, thank you. Tanner, do you have any sort of last words of advice or something that you don't want to forget to say to the audience today?
Yeah, sure. I would just say, especially for those graduate students who are in the last semester of their program and kind of scrambling for a job or kind of what to do next. I know that can be, I've been there recently. I know that feeling. I would just say really maximize the opportunities that you have like today to hear from people in different fields, to just kind of look at the different ways that you can use linguistics in the outside of academia. The job that I currently have, I was never particularly interested in language assessment, but my last year, really, I just went to a ton of networking events and panels and presentations, just to really network as best I can. And I know for some people, especially me, that can kind of be tough. It's hard to put yourself out there, be looking for jobs and things like that. But really just maximizing the opportunities you have to hear about different opportunities in different workplaces. And then always, if you can, make a personal connection with the person, whether that's through LinkedIn or an email or something, because you never know what job options are going to jump out to you. And you might be like me and never have thought you'd work in language assessment, but it ended up you working in language assessment, and then you're able to find ways to apply what you love about linguistics to the job that you have. So I would say always, embrace those opportunities when they come, even if it can feel a little uncomfortable or awkward at times.
Embrace the awkward, embrace the uncomfortable, get comfortable with it, put up a LinkedIn profile and reach out to people, start networking and building relationships. Cecilia, do you have just a couple words to close us?
Yes, I actually have an advice. Connect to the university, connect to your alma mater. Georgetown has been wonderful. I have been able to maintain a foot here and there. I teach there. Sometimes I'm invited, which is nice because I bring the experience to the students. But I know for Georgetown, they have the thing called Hoya Gateway, which connects alumni with the students that graduate. So take advantage of those resources that you may not know exist. With Georgetown too is the Masters in Language and Culture, I think, which Alex leads. So those are organizations or departments that actually invite people like us to come and present and make connections. So don't forget your university from where you graduated. Maintain that relationship because they are the ones that will bring to you people like us.
Exactly. Most every university will have alumni associations that provide career resources well beyond graduation for every stage of your career search. So you can often access videos of career experts and coaches and people in the fields that you're interested in on YouTube. Those resources are available to you. You can also network with alumni, as Cecilia mentions. You can find those alumni through Gateway, that program that's available to many universities. You can also network through LinkedIn. Find your alumni connections through LinkedIn, search for them and reach out to them. Alumni love to reach a hand back and help other alumni. So I'm going to leave us here. I want to thank all of our panelists so much for your generosity with your time and energy on a weekend. I really appreciate the tips and strategies and experiences that you shared today. And I would like to let you know that our next panel will be focused on careers in tech. And you're most welcome, all of you, to stay for that panel after a 10-minute break. You can also hop over to the PSAB bulletin board and view a list of the career events that the Linguistics Beyond Academia Special Interest Group has put together in the coming days that all of you are welcome to attend. So please come back. You'll have a chance to network at the Career Mixer on Wednesday. From 12 to 2 Pacific time, you'll find a registration link in the resource that Emily Pace has shared in the chat. Thank you so much, Emily Pace, linguist at Expert Systems USA and co-leader of our special interest group. And you've also heard from Nancy Frischberg, another leader in our special interest group, putting in all those resources in the chat. So everybody, let's thank our panelists, and we will meet you back here at 10 minutes past the hour for our next panel. Go take a break, get a snack and stretch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. You were so wonderful. I so appreciate your time. Hillary, it was so good to meet you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you too. I've seen you on emails.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to reach out. You were you Dr. Portner's student?
Yes, yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you might want to come back to Georgetown and give a talk sometime.
Oh, I could.
Yeah.
Whenever in person happens again.
Well, I mean, it would probably be like this if you had time for it. So
yeah,
to reach out.
Yeah.
I so appreciate that you were available today to talk with us.
Yeah, no, it was cool too because we're all at Georgetown, but we never crossed paths. I mean, I guess you would have known Tanner, but otherwise.
Yeah, I was peers with Cecilia back in the late 90s.
Okay.
Yeah, so a little before you came.
Okay. So you were at Georgetown too then?
Yeah. I worked with Deborah and with Ron Scullin as
Oh,
did
cool.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, this discussion is a great example of networking among alums. This is exactly what Alex and the panelists were talking about. Keep those connections. They're pretty easy to make and they can really pay off.
And it looks like we still have a bunch of the people of our participants listening in, so that's fine. I was just going to say, I'm going to take a quick break and rearrange my space, and I'll be back here in about 7 minutes or less, right?
Yes, we'll see you at 10 minutes past the hour. Thanks so much, Nancy.
Okay.
And I have to ask you about Georgetown and hi, Greg. We were actually talking about Georgetown, but because somebody I used to work with at Nuance went to Georgetown in the 90s. And since you mentioned the 90s, I thought maybe Jared Stroderman. Do you know Jared Stroderman by chance?
No.
I don't know exactly when he was there, but I'll have to ask him. But
I started in
I just remember he was there at some point.
Oh, interesting. It's nice to
He
meet
was there.
You know Jared, right, Greg?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe he's at Google now, yeah?
Yes, he is now.
Yeah.
We all float around, different places, different times.
Small community. We should all know each other.
Playa Saxa.
That's all.
To the attendees who are still here, if you have informal questions that you'd like to ask, please go ahead, put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, because we're here and we're happy to just chat with you until the next session starts.
And we'll have another 10 minutes, I believe, between the second session and the third session, and a few minutes at the end of this 3.5 hours as well. So if you don't quite have one of those informal questions that Laurel has mentioned yet, we will be here for the 3.5 hours. We're happy to help with whatever we can.
And just a quick word about the mixer that's happening on Wednesday. We have tried to replicate the feeling of being in a big room where you get to just chat with people. So we're using a platform called Gather, which is cute. It's like a little Nintendo game. It's not like Zoom. So it's not this type of interface, but you can walk around, you can chat with people, you can ask questions, you can move from group to group, and it's really meant to be a networking type event. It's not a job fair, so please don't ask people for jobs, but certainly ask people about their personal experiences, their career journeys, their education, and use it as a place to do the kind of networking that we've just been talking about here. It's where you can really meet a ton of people. It should be pretty well attended. It looks like there's probably, what, 50 or 60 people signed up for it so far. So it should be a fun party.
And I think you'll really like it if any of the attendees here have been to the Linguist hallway that Gretchen McCulloch set up. That's using GatherTown.
Yeah.
And I think you'll really enjoy moving your avatar around and engaging in this proximity chat. It really mimics, the hallway experience, the big room experience where you join small groups of people who you'd like to just talk to.
Yeah. So we see that Carly Dickerson has a question. Yeah. Hi, Carly. I know you. A question about salaries.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you. I was just wondering, as I'm in my final, hopefully, year of the PhD, and so as I'm like casually looking at job applications, I notice in the, not outside of academia, they often ask you expected salary. And so one is like, how do you calculate what to ask? But then also, I guess what I was wondering is, if you say a number that is too high, do they take that as they don't consider you, or do they just offer you a lower salary? So how do you kind of negotiate that? Especially, I guess, as a woman, like, you hear all these things about how women kind of undervalue themselves. So like, what do you do about that? Thank you.
What a great question. I think we could all talk about that from our own experiences. So my experience is from the world of marketing and less like computational linguistics, but more using linguistics, sociolinguistics, soft skills, and things like that. To the question of what happens if you ask for too much, you should view salary stuff as a negotiation. It's not black or white. Typically, people come in asking more than they are expecting to pay you. And so it's usually you ask for a number. If it's too high, they'll come back and say, well, that's a little too high. What about this? And then you come back and go, well, that's a little too low. What about this? And eventually you negotiate your way to a reasonable amount. It's not always that way, but mostly that way. And you have to, yeah, do your research first. Very, very important to find out what the standard type of salary is. But you should play the game, and that shows them that you're interested and that you're willing to stand up for yourself. So it is actually to your benefit to stay strong if you think that you deserve a higher salary. And it's especially true for women because unfortunately we're kind of conditioned to say, well, I'm asking too much. They come back, they give me a lower number. I should just accept that or they're never going to talk to me again. And that's not usually the case. So
Yeah,
if anybody else wants to chime in, go ahead, please.
Well, worth adding as well for the negotiation standpoint that typically your benefits are negotiable as well. So if the salary cap for the position is less than you wanted to make, you may be able to negotiate additional leave or something like that. So keep that in mind as well, that there are, non-monetary compensation that comes with work, and those are generally able to be negotiated as well, particularly if you can't get the salary that you want.
Yeah, and to the comment from Kristen in the chat, it's an American thing. It's totally an American thing. And it's so unfair to ask the applicant to say what the thing should be. I mean, in the interest of transparency, salaries should be posted. They could still be negotiated, but to make it this big, dark, deep thing where you're not even allowed to talk about it with your fellow employees.
And you are allowed to talk about it, by the way.
Yes. They'd like you to think you can't, but you can. So it's very unfair to people who are trying to come into industry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I always say, ask the range. What kind of range is in your budget? Because that also gives you a hint of, are you being offered something at the low end of it's better to be at the low end of a big, in the career ladder, if they have 4 levels of linguists, let's just say that, or whatever job you're applying to, you want to be at the low end of your level so that you don't have to get a promotion to be able to get a salary increase. Right?
Yeah, great point.
Yeah. And David
so there's all
Edwards
kinds of negotiating things that are beyond the scope of this particular panel, I think. But it's a great area to talk about for sure. And I don't know if people saw in the chat that Chris said Google is notorious for not negotiating salary, but they can offer different kinds of stock benefits, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
lots of great
that's
comments in
really
the chat.
helpful.
Yeah. So this is it's a whole discussion on itself. It's a wonderful thing. And I'm sitting in a hotel room, and let's see, I don't know if I can get it to be more light than this, but that's about it. Joel apparently has a question. Where are you, Joel? Where is your question? Is it in the chat? Oh, we can ask Joel to speak up, right?
Hello. Hi.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. I see you raised your hand in the chat. Thank you. That was very nice.
Thank you so much. So my main motivation for being on the job market is actually related to relocation. So I'm wondering, I guess, what is just the best practice for bringing this up in a cover letter? Because I know that's maybe not the first thought in most hiring managers' mind.
Well, great question and complicated question, but you don't want to bring it up in the cover letter. You don't want to make that the focus. You want them to want you first, and then you can discuss what are, and they may, if it's crucial to them that you be located in a particular geographic area, they will put that in the requirements. And these days, when you look at the requirements, it's remote until September 21 and then negotiable, or you can live in any one of these 6 geographic areas. So yeah, you can ask the HR person before you ask the hiring manager. You can say to the HR person something like, the talent acquisition person was the way Cecilia was referring to them. is
I guess it
geography
would be
negotiable?
redundant. Um,
Sorry?
No, I'm just thinking if I'm applying to a particular position, I
Uh-huh.
suppose it's different now because of COVID. Everyone's working from home.
Yep.
Um,
Well, knowledge workers are.
right, but just most of the editor positions, I mean,
Yeah, that's a knowledge worker. Sure.
is it a particular company? They like, so say I'm applying for jobs in New York, the company is going to be located there, so they kind of already have that expectation when I'm applying to the position that
Mhm.
that is where the location would be.
They'll tell you where the location is going to be. Yeah. If you look at a job posting, it'll say you can be in San Francisco, Dublin, New York, or Houston, you know,
Right.
that they usually say which office they're hiring into. But you can be remote reporting into a particular office. You can live in New Hampshire and report into the Atlanta office.
Right. I think
So that's
COVID
beyond.
is
Okay.
really changing.
It's an interesting question, and it's changing because of COVID. You're right.
Mhm.
So there's a lot more leeway for remote relationships. You may want to physically show up in Atlanta, even if you're in New Hampshire, a couple of times a year, or maybe more often than that, maybe for a week, a month. And that should be part of the negotiation, but not until they've offered you the job. You should make them fall in love with you so they can't imagine anybody else being in that job. And then you can add on some other, I have these wishes and I'm hoping it's not a deal breaker and let's talk about it, you know?
Right. I guess that's the type of concern that is not really about the job per se.
Right.
So would fall more under things like benefits and salary.
Yeah. Okay. So let me move off of benefits and salary and move into the topic for the time we're in. And we're just a couple minutes late to start, but I'm really glad that this discussion is happening because it says to me how many people are eager to hear about the whole extent of job finding outside of academia. So perfect. And I think people are going to continue on your thread, Joel, in the chat, even while we're introducing and talking to our panelists today. So I'm going to do the talk part of it here. And I'm going to ask Chris Stewart from Google to do the management of the chat and make sure all the questions are coming back to me. I'm working on a screen where if I pull the chat up, it covers too much of my screen and I don't feel like I can see all of you. So we've got 3 panelists today who are going to talk about their jobs in voice user interfaces, conversation design, discourse, and so on. Let me introduce myself, and then we can, Chris will say something about himself, and then I'll go through some of the same points that Alex was making in the first part of this panel where we were talking to people from the government sector. And this time we're talking to people in industry and so on. So hi, Briel, I can see you. Am I saying your name correctly?
You are. Hey,
okay.
Nice to be here today.
Nice to meet you. So let's let you go first and give us a 1 or 2 minute summary introduction to you. What are you doing now? And, you know, job title, where did you go to school? Very brief. And then we'll come back and circle on some of these. Let me just say the other 2 panel. I was going to introduce myself too, right? I'm Nancy Frischberg. I am an independent contractor, and I'm interested in qualitative experiences, human experiences while using digital products or physical products. And so I call myself a user experience researcher and strategist. But I've been in industry side of things since 1985, I think. That's a long time. It's longer than some of you have been alive. Oh, well. But it was a hard transition to make because there weren't people ahead of me that I could talk to about how did you make the transition. So that's what, I have a PhD from University of California, San Diego. I was the first PhD in sign languages, and let that hijack the rest of the conversation. I think in a group of linguists, we can all accept that as a real thing. And let me say for Chris, do you want to get on and say a quick hello and introduce
Sure.
yourself?
Sure.
Yeah.
My name is Chris Stewart. I work at Google as an analytical linguist in a team that does human computation, doing mostly automated analysis of large data sets that are annotated by humans, raters across the world. I previously worked as a senior data scientist and a voice engineer at Nuance Communications. And yeah, PhD in French linguistics from the University of Illinois in 2009, and had a tenure track job, left the tenure track, and have been in industry ever since.
And I should mention that even though neither Chris nor I mentioned it earlier, both of us do coaching privately outside of our regular jobs for people who are trying to make career transitions, especially out of academia. So that's the commercial, that's over. All right, now to our panelists. Brielle, please talk to us about you.
Sure. So I am I'm head of product at Botmock. I'll get into that a little bit more later.
Okay.
I got 2 undergrad degrees from the University of Colorado at Boulder. One was in linguistics, which was really kind of an afterthought, and one was in neuroscience, really with the intention of going to medical school after. I grew up in a family that was very STEM oriented, and I really wasn't able to visualize a path towards success other than medicine based on kind of the environment I grew up in, even though I realized in high school I loved linguistics. So I added a Ling minor as a sophomore in college, here and there convincing my parents, like, don't worry, this is just like a fun thing on the side, like don't stress out. And then by senior year, I had taken so many Ling courses that, you know, all I needed was like 2 classes in another language to get, you know, to make it a major and get a degree. So that's where I found myself. And long story short, I was so unaware of this world when I did graduate. The only thing I had ever really heard about the world of like tech or industry or a linguistics opportunities that weren't in academia were my best friend, who had always been kind of an artist. My parents saw her kind of path through high school and college, and they were like, you know, she's great, she's like doing her own thing, but you need to stay focused. And she ended up getting an amazing internship at Spotify as a designer during college, and then, you know, worked at startups, and now she's at Snapchat as a designer. And so it finally opened my eyes to this idea that creatives can, you know, forge their own path in this world. And she had been like sneakily sending me linguistics, like analytical linguist job descriptions from Google over the course of my senior year, and trying to say like, hey, this is a thing, like you can do this. And I was like, cool, sounds good, but now I'm gonna stay focused. So anyway, long story short, I realized as a senior, like, this isn't working for me. And luckily I had been a live-in nanny at that time, so I didn't have to move home after I graduated. And I kind of just threw myself into learning everything I could about UX design, what this new space of VUI design was, and started working at a very small startup. And that was my kind of foot in the door. And
Okay, so hold on to that one. We're going to talk about how you got to that first job. But so so you're now working on VUI design. Expand that, because I'm not sure everybody knows the pronunciation.
VUI design, voice user interface design. Sorry, I wanted to cut myself short in case I'm taking too much time with this intro. But okay. Yes, I started as a voice user interface designer at a very small startup, and there's 2 people. It was really me and my boss. So that was my first realization that, you know, this world of startups exists, and, you know, really starting to finally reach out. And I actually had reached out to Anne during that summer, asking her like, hey, what do you do? I'm really just trying to find people that are in this world. And because I don't really know what it means to be an analytical linguist at Google. I don't really know what it means to be like this in the real world. So I was
Okay, that's a great segue where we can get a quick introduction to Anne and come back to you. How about that? Thank you so much. So I want to introduce you all to Anne Time-Goebel, and you're going to correct me on pronunciations also.
Sure.
And
Since I'm surrounded by linguists, yes. That's the
yes,
only time I would do that.
And so you were in this before Brill was in it.
I was.
And so tell us the quickie introduction and then we'll go deeper.
Sure. The quick introduction is that I also came out of UC San Diego grad school. And
like me, not like Brill,
you,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
But we did not overlap.
Because I'm so old, yeah.
I'm no spring chicken either, but but in any case, yeah, so I had my degree was in linguistics and cognitive science because of the UCSD CogSci program, which is, you know, people are in all these different departments, and it's just a fantastic place to get into this kind of work that we're all interested in. And the thing is, while I was in grad school, I was a foreign student because I was born and raised in Sweden. So I was kind of limited on kind of work I could be doing for money while I was a student. But my advisor, who was a phonetician, said, hey, ITT, they're doing all this work on phonetics. They're doing this phone marking on because they're developing a speech recognizer. And you want to do that? I'm like, absolutely, it sounds great. So that's kind of how I sort of started down this path. And then I did a similar job for another startup before I finished. And then it was kind of the natural, easy choice then to just kind of go that way. So.
And you liked it.
I
mean, yeah. And I don't know if you were here to listen to the first part of the government part of the panel, but one of the things that people advised, the panelists advised, was do something you like,
yes,
and that uses your skills. Well, so it's not just that you found that job and poof, there was a path for you, but you really liked it anyway.
That's exactly it. Like you mentioned earlier, Nancy, it was I had found out about linguistics from somebody who went to UCLA when I was in college, and I'm like, what is this linguistics thing?
Yeah,
I need to find out because I came from a family that was very much into language and so on. So it's kind of a natural, like, well, this is cool. I wonder what I can do with it, but I'll worry about that later. So that's how I got started. And then just the briefy one is that I've kind of been at various kinds of companies, big and small, new ones, like many people, Amazon, now I'm at a small startup. And I like both of them, both types of jobs for different reasons. We can go into that more.
Yeah, I think that's a nice theme that we can pursue in a few minutes after we meet our third panelist, who is Greg Bennett. And I think I know how to pronounce his name because it's pretty regular in the greater Anglo-Saxon area. So Greg, tell us about you. And you came out of a Georgetown program. I'm not sure if it was the same one. Let's see, Kyle. Go ahead, there you go.
Ooh. So I attended Georgetown for undergrad and grad and focused in applied linguistics and sociolinguistics because at the time I couldn't really sort of make up my mind between language teaching and discourse analysis, interactional sociolinguistics. So I did a bit of a fuse of the two. And technically my degree is in applied linguistics because the applied linguistics concentration at Georgetown allowed for a lot more flexibility to spend time in the sociolinguistics area, as opposed to had I done the socio concentration, I wouldn't have been able to do quite as much of the language pedagogy coursework. So I did that work. Actually, my first exposure to industry was while I was at Georgetown in graduate school. We had a research assistantship for a project through DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And that was really sort of my first exposure to doing research for a product. So what does it mean to understand a particular interaction or users for a given, at the time it was a video game that we could potentially develop into an experience. And at that time, I didn't even know what user experience was. I was just like, okay, well, these people tend to do these things. And so we should make the product do, X in order to accommodate that. I took a year off after grad school to kind of do the whole find myself, California yoga, granola, hummus journey, as it were, which was
Okay.
hugely valuable. Spent some time teaching ESL because I didn't really do any teaching as part of my graduate work. I only did research assistantships. And then, you know, of course, our guardian angel, as it were, Anna Marie Trester, reached out to me and was like, hey, I heard you're in the Bay Area. Microsoft is looking for a researcher who knows something about conversation and ethnography. And I was like, Microsoft knows what those things are and cares to hire somebody who like specializes in that? So I was like, sure, why not? And at the time, I didn't even have a resume. I just had my CV, and the email actually had come from you, Nancy, that you had sent the email to Anna. And at the time, we didn't know each other. I was just like, okay, well, maybe the hiring managers will think I'm legit if I attach this entire email thread to my response.
Oh, did you?
So
really?
I did. I forwarded the whole thing. I was just like, maybe they're going to know somebody here because I don't know any of these people. And then I attached my CV because I didn't know any better, and was like, hey, I don't know if you know, you certainly don't know me, but you might know one of these people. I'm interested in the job. And that's actually what got my foot in the door. They were like, oh, I know Nancy. Lisa Peasantson was actually the person hiring. So, and like all they did was read maybe like the first page of my CV. So of course, like they didn't know anything about what I did, because the first page of your CV is just like where you went to school, right? And so when I got in the interview room, that's when I found out it was the project they were working on was Cortana. They did offer me the role after I explained to them the kind of work that I did at DARPA. And once I got in the role, that's when I had the great fortune of working with Lisa Peasantson, who took me under her wing and taught me what UX was. And once I figured out what user experience was, that's when I realized, okay, actually the jump from sociolinguistic research to user experience research actually is not that far. It's just a matter of figuring out what user experience calls these research methods instead of sociolinguistics. And at that point, that's when, Nancy, I sought you out and had a
Right, we had
conversation.
lunch.
We had lunch at Yahoo. At the time, I ended up moving to Yahoo from Microsoft, and I was like, how do you talk about tokens when you're talking to non-linguists? Because I don't know what I'm going to do about this. And it was great. You facilitated me like a user researcher, and it was wonderful. And then I ended up at Yahoo because I wanted to see, okay, am I really interested in user experience, or am I really just interested in tech? Found out that I preferred user experience research to search relevance, which was what I was doing at Yahoo. I got connected to someone at Salesforce through a Google group called Design User Research, which is pretty popular. Everybody, I think, is on there. For a contract role that had been filled, but then they were saying, hey, if you're interested in a full-time role, that might be opening up in a couple of months. So I stayed in touch with the hiring manager, reached back out to them once I saw the full-time role for a user experience research role, and then said, hey, would you be willing to refer me? And that she was, very luckily, and that's what got me into the interview room. As soon as they submitted the referral, the following day, I got a call from the head of research for an interview. 3 days later, I was interviewing, and then another couple days later, I had an offer. Started out, I've been at Salesforce for 5 years.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's been a while. I did not expect to be here this long, if I'm being honest. I started out as a user experience researcher working on the flagship Sales Cloud product. And the entire time I was working on research for their AI products, which at the time were more fledgling. And then I moved over to the Service Cloud product, which is for their customer service industry, to work on the Einstein bot builder, because that's when I found out that we were going to produce a chatbot builder. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, everybody out of my way. I want to research that.
All right, I'm here to help. Right?
Yes, and that's
but
when
I'm not
I started.
from the government. I'm from Salesforce.
Yes, exactly. And that's when I started moonlighting as a conversation designer, offering because everyone on that team really wanted advice, like how long should the pause between turns be, or how do we organize the intents, or how do we frame the conversation? And I'm like, A, I can't believe you're using these words. B, I can absolutely help. And C, let's go. So Did that for, I think, 2.5 years until the demand for conversation design resources, like actual design assets, really hit a fever pitch. And I sort of seized that moment to essentially found Salesforce's first official conversation design department. And so now I run that.
That's very fun. And how many conversations, do you have anybody reporting to you, or are you a loose matrix of people? I'm sorry, I'm going on beyond this intro thing. And
Sure.
So let's hold that question for just a minute,
Okay.
because I want to draw attention to a couple of themes. And Kyle, if we can have all three people on with me at the same time, can you highlight all three? And then we can go back and forth and have more like a real conversation. And Kyle doesn't have to do so much work. I don't know if he's even listening, but we can hope. I'm hearing two themes that I know we want to come back to besides the content of your actual day-to-day work. And I'm talking to all three, Brielle and Anne and Greg. And that is this business about startups versus big companies. And I think there's a very interesting interplay with some questions that are coming in the Q&A, which is about visas for people who are not US citizens getting jobs with US companies in US locations. And how do you negotiate that, right? And so I hope that we will all be able to talk about some of those things as well. So if you haven't already told us about your first job after graduation, and so Greg, you're holding up, you've got one marker in the parking lot, right? That you're going to tell us about this. Do you report to people? Is there a conversation design group, an affiliation group, you know? And there's lots of ways that organizations can handle it. And I'm curious about how Salesforce is doing it now. But let's, we're almost there. I see two of us, and we're going to have two more coming in. One, okay, good. And two, good. Okay. If you haven't told us about your first job after grad school, oh, sorry, I don't mean after grad school. I mean your first job outside of academia and that transition. I'd like to hear from any of you that hasn't. I think we sort of heard from Brielle, if you have something more about that one. And Anne, I don't know, you kind of, you sort of jumped into ITT, but you didn't really give that detail about how you made those connections.
Sure.
Was Peter Benson involved?
Not at that point.
Uh-huh, okay.
There's a name I haven't heard in a long time. But no, you're right. Actually, he was there. That's right. He was there. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I kind of hinted at that it was sort of a slide into it, even though I think still I am kind of at heart more of a sort of researcher, like, I mean, academic on some level, but sort of practical academic, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to just sit and do theory. I want to sort of apply it, but I also really want to get at the underlying, like really how does this stuff work, you know, and all that kind of stuff, right? So it has it's always this balance of finding, you know, how do I do the stuff that's actually real data and reality that can be applied, and you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, so that's how it started. I started just doing this the phone marking, and then as I was finishing up, getting closer and closer to finishing grad school, and being there on a student visa, I'm thinking, what am I going to do next? You know?
Yeah.
And do I want to go down the path of academia or not? And I got this other similar job for another startup in San Diego that started out as doing phonetic marking of stuff, but then kind of went into other things. And it was a small R&D company, very language and speech focused. And they kind of survived by getting small business grants, mainly from different sources, NSF, you know, NIH, DOD, you know, take what you can get. So I was doing that for quite a while, and that turned into a real job. Then after I finished, I'm like, okay, you're doing my stuff. I'm sticking with you, you know, there comes your visa tie-in, you know. And then I worked there for quite a few years until it kind of folded for various reasons. And that's when I went to Nuance, because a friend, again, it's the connection stuff. A friend who knew somebody else who like, hey, why don't you talk to so-and-so? She's at Nuance. Why don't you talk to her? She does your kind of stuff. And then you know, that's how it absolutely, you cannot underestimate those personal contacts. And I feel also like that taking that step of actually saying, yeah, sure, I'll do that phonetic marking stuff. The during grad school. If I hadn't done that, I have no idea where I would have gone. I guess that was the first step into that path.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Does anybody else want to say more about their initiation into the world of non-academic work? You're okay. Okay, fine, initiation stuff. I actually want to hear more about the advertisement for this group, which is about technology and phonetics. But I think, you know, Greg, you're the furthest from phonetics in some way, except for that stuff about how long should the pauses be between the question and waiting for the answer. Are you still there? Should I wait for you? You know, that one, right? But Brill, I think you and Anne both can talk to that more. And Anne, I hope you'll give an advertisement for the upcoming book. So Brill,
So,
yeah.
I think Anne really is the expert on this one. I don't have any advanced degrees, so everything I know about linguistics, I was trying to pack in college between pre-med coursework and neuroscience. I wish I could have gone a lot deeper because I think that's one of the reasons I consider going back to school in the future, because I kind of feel like my linguistics education was rushed. All I knew is that I had like this weird, inexplicable passion for learning about it and like trying to teach my friends about it. But I wish I could have gone much, much deeper. So I do know that when I did start as a voice user interface designer, sometimes I would get to draw on that knowledge when, for example, helping a client pick a name for their like Alexa skill. So in my last startup, we were a product company, but also kind of trying to get off the ground by doing a bit more agency type stuff. So our promise was that you come to us, we will help you think up a good use case to bring your brand or your company to a voice user experience, probably accessed via Google Assistant or Alexa at that time. And then, and we would basically bring them through we would really take on a lot of that process. So it wouldn't be like a normal, you know, graphic design agency situation where the client already kind of probably has an idea of what it should look like and feel like, because these experiences on the smart speakers are so new. So we would really kind of drive the whole thing and I remember helping a client pick the name that he was going to launch on Alexa with, and explaining to him like what makes a good name and what doesn't, because it has to be easy to say. The phonotactics have to be just so it has to be memorable because it's not right there in front of your eyes like a visual interface is. You obviously want it to somehow reflect your brand. But yeah, I remember being able to explain a little bit about like why this name wouldn't be such a great idea because of this reason, the phonology of this versus this. And he responded like he was interested, but I was like, okay, I'm actually, maybe in the future I'll still, because I gave him like 2 paragraphs like of hardcore linguistic reasoning, and he was like, okay, just tell me what I should do. So from then on, I was like, I'll just think about it on my own, and then I'll sort of give like the 2-sentence reasoning from now on.
But you know, you can back it up with all kinds of other stuff if anybody tries to right.
Yeah.
Right.
If they push back, we've got the rationale.
Right. Great answer. Thank you. I appreciate it. And tell us more about your stuff and about the content of your work in the past few years.
Sure. So of course, what you see, and you're probably, if you're around people doing this stuff at all, you see a lot of people who come through the nuance doors, because we like to refer to as the nuance mafia. We kind of tend to stay in touch and we show up all over the place, right? Because the thing is, nuance was and is a place that, of course, does work for call center, phone stuff, and the things that people love to hate, right? Which is far from the press or say one that people like to point to, which is just, if you do that, you just have other problems, right? That is not what good VUI design is about for those things or anything else, right? But the thing is about working in that space is that we were kind of limited in many ways. And I'm very glad that I went through that, because when I started, it was a small company, and which means everybody kind of had their fingers in a lot of things. So I got a lot broader experience than people even who started there a few years after I did got a chance to do, like writing grammars and things like that, which is really cool because as somebody who's interested in linguistics, right, you see exactly what happens. It makes you understand, you have to think about both what the user does, what's easy and hard for the user, and what's easy and hard for the computer, and how do you get these to talk to each other, right, in ways that work for everybody. And in a way, it was actually easier back then than it is now, when some of the technology is further ahead. I mean, in terms of recognition and things like that, but most people don't get the opportunity to get that close to actually messing with the details, right? So, then so I went from there. After many years, I went to Amazon Lab 126 before Alexa came out. So I was working on things related to that. And then I got lured away to another startup. It's like went to small to big to small. Because I really do like.
I call that my yo-yo career. I do that
exactly,
too.
right?
Tiny little company, big
exactly.
company. Yeah.
Exactly. And they're good, like we mentioned, the pros and cons of both. I kind of like the smaller companies because of the opportunity. If you're working with the right people, you have a chance to make more of an impact sometimes. And again, you get closer to the details of the, where you can mess with stuff. But that's not always true, right? So, I mean, it all depends on the details. But I went to a place where we were doing a multimodal app for helping people prepare for medical procedures. And but it had a speech component to it, and brought up some really interesting questions linguistically in terms of what do you do, especially in a field like health, right? I mean, now you can't just say, oh, oops, I gave you the wrong song, right? Oops, I gave you the wrong medical advice. Oh, darn, right? I mean, that's just isn't going to fly. So it's a whole different level of tricky to do it then. And how do you confirm that you actually heard the right thing and you're still being helpful? And sometimes you might have, other forces in play that, it's like, well, business rules, blah, 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 that's always a fun one. But so that was a really, really interesting job. And what we did there also in terms of phonetics and so on, and to piggyback on what Brielle said, we were trying to come up with names for our own products. And we actually did some tests with, naive listeners where we had a whole little thing set up of playing a bunch of names and see what people remembered and why, and figured it out that way, how to name stuff. So that's another place where just suddenly the whole background of, linguistics and phonetics popped up, right?
Right. And you didn't choose to hire in Laurel or her company, which specializes in naming.
Well, because we're a small, poor company. That's why.
Right, exactly. So sometimes you got to use these skills in other ways, right?
Exactly.
You probably didn't follow the process she would have followed,
Exactly.
but you got there.
That's
and
right.
you felt confident that the linguistic knowledge you were bringing to the problem of the brand name would be sufficient.
It helped in that context, exactly. So
right.
And then I went from there to Denon, which is an audio equipment company that makes very nice speakers and so on. And I was there with a group of people. Some of them were from Nuance. And we were working on doing speech stuff there. That was pretty cool until they decided not to do that. And now I'm for a startup doing a little radio thing, little speech radio thing. And I've been there since the beginning of the strange year that we just left. And then my spare time, I'm trying to finally finish this book that I've been working on with another ex-Nuance person on mastering voice interfaces, which is talking about a lot of these things, like how do you get people to work together to get a good product? Your linguists, your developers, your marketing business people. So.
Good. Okay. And so, Greg, now tell us a story. Except you got to come off mute.
Any
There you
story
go.
at all?
No,
Or-
well, either you tell us one of these stories about, your day-to-day life. What are you really doing? Or pull the placeholder out of the parking lot.
Sure.
For a
I
mixed
can actually
metaphor.
probably address the two of them together. So I think my day-to-day really is sort of zipping about the company and chasing down any experience that involves conversation, and making sure that anyone who's working on it can understand the linguistic stipulations around making a choice about language. So that can range from anything to, are we going to, like put a period at the end of our sentence or an exclamation mark for the conversation design that we're putting in for this text-based chatbot? Or it could be, we want to interpret salespeople's sales calls and figure out if they're going well or if they're not going well. Okay, that's great. But, if you're doing this based on, to keep it within the realm of phonetics, if you're doing this based on pitch, and we know that certain conversational styles have a higher pitch or a greater intensity, perhaps, than the data set that you're training on, then now all of a sudden you've introduced a bias into the system, and any salesperson who talks loudly is now all of a sudden negative, and that impacts their job. So, making sure that teams are aware of this. I'm not a phonetician, but I do know just enough phonetics to be dangerous and to be a real pain in the you-know-what for our engineers and data scientists, whereby I've gotten in lengthy arguments in front of executives, where I will, where I will go to bat for the sake of, phonetics, where I'm like, I'm sorry, but just because, and really, I think from the angle of sociophonetics. Again, I'm not a sociophonetician, and I do think sociophoneticians are a real value add to this space. So if you are a sociophonetician, I highly encourage you to think through moving into this space, or the intersection of voice or conversation design and ethics. Ethics is the hot word they like to use in the industry. I hate it, but because I don't think it's accurate, but that's what they like to use for equity and equality. And so for that sake, I will go to bat and say something like, well, hey, just because you can predict the length of a given vocal tract, given the pitch value for a sound, does not make that person male or female. And that's like one of the proudest things I've ever done at Salesforce, where I'm like, no, honey, we're not doing that.
Good, thank you.
So
let's all join in and do that together. Yes.
Yes. And then in terms of my team and whatnot, so I'm not hiring at the moment. I don't have any direct reports. It's more of this like dotted line matrix. And by dotted line, I mean that person, the other people who work in relation to conversation design with me now, have direct managers who are not me, but that their work very much is in line with my space. So I'm hoping to kind of grow that over the next year, in hopes to actually hire direct reports and grow that team.
Cool, that sounds great. Let's see, we've got, I think, a representative of each. So I think that I don't know whether we have to talk about this at all. That is, we have one person who got 2 bachelors, one person who got a master's, and one person with a PhD. And that was one of the questions that had come up earlier is, do I need a PhD? Do I need an advanced degree? And part of what I always say to people is, if you want to go to grad school, go because you want to learn something. And if you know what you want to learn, even better. But don't go to grad school, and especially don't pay your own money unless you really want to do it. And I think Brielle can speak to this, that you've gotten lots of influence in the field, not because of your degree, but because of your actions and your ability to draw a group together. So talk about your Women in Voice group that people may want to hear about.
Oh, okay, sure. So yeah, funny story, actually. When I was a junior, or in the middle of my kind of senior year crisis about am I going to med school? Am I gonna not go to med school? What the heck? This is what I've been planning my whole life. I very hurriedly got in my application for a it was a program that could help me get a master's in linguistics with one more year of school.
Okay.
And I really, really, really wanted this. And I felt like it was the right thing to do because it kind of would give me that one more year to really figure out if there was a world out there that I could apply my skills in and like a possible career. So I wouldn't have to just start studying for the MCAT right afterwards. So I got rejected from that. And I'm so glad I did because it just forced me to have this reckoning a little bit earlier. And now now when I like with a couple years under my belt from working, I know so much more clearly what I would want to like go back to school for, because I really, there's all these things that I just wish I knew so much more about and that would help me with my job. And honestly, I'm learning more every day about other stuff too. Like over the last month, my co-founder asked me to join our company as a late co-founder, which blew my mind. And I'm so honored to be, in this position. And it made me realize that I really do love this kind of startup world that I'm in as well. Like it's a whole other side to things that I had never even anticipated. So I love this entrepreneurship thing and I love, business, and it's also interesting. And I'm still doing, I'm still working with language on a day-to-day basis, but it just opened my eyes to this whole other world as well. So in terms of like the degree, I know now if I go back to school in a few years what I'd want to do. And when I graduated, like I said, I was living as I had my living situation figured out. I was working part-time as a live-in nanny. And then that freed up my other time to really like go all in on finding some kind of internship or a job where I could just get a bit more experience in this field. And like Greg said, I had also never even heard of what user experience was. So I just, for those first couple of months, I like read every Medium article I could get my hands on. I reached out to people. I probably talked to 50 to 60 people in that summer just to ask them like what they do and how they started to do it. And
without asking them for a job, right?
No.
You were doing informational interviewing,
yes.
Which says, I'm not asking you for a job. I
yes.
want to hear about how did you navigate this path that I'm stumbling on.
Exactly, right? Because I knew I wasn't qualified for a job yet. I wanted to learn how to become qualified. And really, I took this tip from the book Design Your Life. And I really recommend that book to anyone looking to start their career, make a change, or literally anyone actually, just in general. It's a great book. But yeah, just reaching out and trying to create stuff. So that's one thing that I realized was so different about this world versus academia was in academia, you really need a lot of experience. You need the credentials. You need, like, I had worked in a neuroscience lab and I saw the ladder. Like, I was like, okay, we've got this, the head of the lab, she's like the queen bee, nobody can question her, she's got all this experience and she's like the final word on everything. And then there was the grad student that I was under, and the grad student was like, like we would look up to her, and because she was, like she was finishing up, and it was just this whole like, you had no basis to really contribute unless you had already put in the work, put in the time, put in the hours, written all kinds of papers. And when I started my first job, my boss, he was like, no, you need to start writing because you have interesting ideas and you just need to put them on Twitter. You need to put them on LinkedIn. You need to get a Twitter first off, because I wasn't really a social media person. And I was really just using LinkedIn to find people, not like put anything onto LinkedIn.
Right.
I didn't want to. Like, I don't like that whole, I didn't like the idea of any of that. But he was the one really pushing me, and he said, you need to use this time to write and read, but really put your work out. And then, and from there, I was just so grateful to have this opportunity to learn, speak at conferences. He pushed me to apply to speak at a lot of conferences, even though I was like, who am I to be speaking at conferences? And he was like, no, there are no true experts in the discipline of smart speaker voice design at this moment in time, because it's so new and you already have a background in thinking about it. So whatever you submit will be of value to someone. And it just blew my mind that like people would actually listen to me without me having put in the time or the work necessarily. But basically me just demonstrating I want to be a part of this, I'm willing to put in work right now, and I have some good ideas that I would like to share with you. So
and I want to underscore what you just said, is that you did put in the time. You're denying that you put in the time, but I believe you put in the time, and you did the thinking work to pull this stuff out of what you had learned from linguistics and attach it to the product world in a way that you could talk about. You were self-reflective. So whatever you're self-reflective about is useful, because that's the basis for an interesting conversation with somebody else. So thank you, Brielle. That was great. I like hearing about that.
no worries.
Next, who wants to ask ask each other some questions, and then we're going to get to more of these questions from the audience. And I know that a lot of people are on some of very mechanical things about how do I find I say mechanical. How do you find an internship? And my first thought is be on the right lists. So we mentioned one list, but there are many, many ways to find the discussion groups. And again, LinkedIn is one place where almost any topic you want to learn about, there is a discussion group or 6 on that topic. And so, being a lurker briefly until you see whether this is what I'm interested in may be the way to go. But you may have other secret sources of postings about interesting internships that I know nothing about. Maybe you want to name a couple of those.
I have a question for Greg, which is, how much pushback do you get? You mentioned you stand up and, have to say, okay, fine, this is how it works, but how much do you feel like the people that you were working with are sort of receptive and,
I think it's a mix, and it depends on what it is that I'm sort of advocating for. I think, given what we've been talking about in the chat, that you always have to anchor it in what does it mean for the business? What does it mean for the product? So when it came to, for example, the push that I was making regarding gender and pitch, I essentially said, look, if we do this and overly ascribe a gender to a given pitch, then we run the risk of misgendering the user. And here's what it means for the user experience. It means that potentially the voice assistant, back when we were working on voice, Salesforce is not working on voice at the moment, but back when we were, I said, like, this could potentially make it a huge usability issue. Also, what does it get us? Why do we need to know their gender? What are we going to do with that information? Also, if we misgender somebody, hey, guess what? Marketing and PR, I don't want to be you, because you're going to have your
investor
job.
Relations. Let's talk
Exactly.
about investor relations.
Exactly. This could hit us in a really bad way for the optics of the business, and we could potentially not just lose business, but hurt our overall brand. And I know that at Salesforce, brand is extremely important. So making sure to kind of anchor it in those values for the business, so that way they can go, oh, shoot. And I'm like, yeah, so you might want to listen to what I want to say, as opposed to something like for chat where it's like, okay, I think probably the biggest argument I got into over chat was whether or not our conversation design should spell all right with 2 words or 1 word. And I'm like, first of all, people, spelling is a farce. Second of all, if you're going to impose your fascist spelling ideas upon me, then you better think twice about how I'm going to respond. Because I basically was saying, like, look, I get that all right as 2 words makes sense. That's how I spell it too, but that's not conversational, not how our users do it. And if we want to essentially evoke a particular experience or strike this type of tone with the experience, then we should make it 1 word. So again, trying to sort of anchor it in, what does this mean for the experience? What does it mean for the product? What does it mean for the business? Whether that is, this is what users could potentially react to. They might think that Salesforce is stuffy, do we want that? No. Or this might be a brand issue. Like, is it going to potentially impact our bottom line, like the money that we could make? Is it going to bring bad marketing or bad press to the company? All of those, I think, are great levers to pull to anchor your recommendations.
Great. So I see in the chat there's a really active conversation about internships, and there's also several questions in the Q&A about visas. So I think we should definitely address both of those things. Anybody want to start with? I'll give a quickie thing opinion about visas, and that is in the book What Color Is Your Parachute, and the website, which is if you don't know about it already because you've been in academia with blinders on, I suggest you look at the website and potentially pick up the book. It's been in print for 40 years and is revised every year, so it's not old news. It's just the principles keep getting updated with the new technology, and they bring in the technology in. But informational interview, what's a resume look like? How do you write a cover letter? How do you create what they call, some places call it a success group or an accountability group? That's a useful thing. But the reason I mention it here is because they say, go to a small company first as you're making a transition. That's who's going to have the flexibility. And I think Brielle has talked about this, where you're going to get to try on a whole bunch of different roles. You'll see which ones you're really good at, which ones you like, and how those things come together. And that will help you to decide what you want to do next. But at least it gives you a foot in the door. However, if you are not a US citizen and you're trying to get a job at a US startup, they will not have anybody to help you with visa stuff. They don't have that kind of infrastructure yet. And so you're going to need to find people in a visa situation for US employment are going to need to find a company that's large enough that they've got people in the support staff, HR staff, who specialize in that and will help guide you and defend your visa status with regard to employment. So that's my quick answer to the visa situation. But I welcome other points of view and elaborations. And talk about internships, and no, not all internships require that you have a PhD. Have you hired interns? Any of you here?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, so what
Yes.
kinds of interns did you hire?
Well, I mentioned this in the chat briefly, but we at my current startup, we've hired interns that are in high school, in college, and beyond. So we, as a startup, a very small startup, we're 5 people, now 6 people actually. We don't have the ability to be super picky. And in fact, we really want people that are generalists versus specialists, because in a team of 5 or 6, you have to be able to have every teammate thinking about the whole company as, you know, how does my role interact with yours? How do I affect their role? And so yeah, I would say, like, I've always really been a generalist because I love doing a lot of different things and learning about a lot of different things. And that, I think, when I did interview at more corporate companies, I could tell that that's a skill I really needed to, I could tell that creating a better narrative about myself was a skill I really had to develop, because I was like, I can do product marketing, I can do product management, I'm a linguist too. Here I am. And they were like, who the heck, who are you? Like, what? We don't believe you can do any of this because you're saying you can do everything. And I totally get why they would think that. So for me personally, that's a big takeaway I got from interviewing at corporate places. But at a startup, we really look for people that are like that, because we want them to be so interested and passionate about everything, really, and be able to do a lot of different stuff.
Right. Cool. Okay, we're getting close to the end of our time. Excuse me. And I'm going to ask if you have any last minute things that I didn't ask you about or hasn't been brought up in the chat yet that you definitely want to communicate with the audience. We've got like 70 people in our audience. We're so excited that everybody's been finding out about the activities of the Linguistics Beyond Academia, SIG. So happy to have your closing comments, folks.
I would really piggyback on encouraging people to reach out to other linguists that have jobs that are similar to what you might be interested in, because like Brielle sort of hinted at, you know, like she reached out to me. And, you know, anytime, I think, I don't know about other, you know, subjects and backgrounds, but certainly I've never seen a linguist in this field who says, oh, some linguist I never heard of tried to talk to me and I don't want to, right? No, not at all. Like, yes, come talk to me, right? Absolutely. So do that, because that is so, it's invaluable. You definitely should do that. And that's how you find out about what's going on and who knows who and who can recommend what you look at next.
Right.
I
Super.
completely
Greg.
agree with that. I think, yes, definitely reach out, network, but also I think like the biggest thing for me that I notice when I talk to linguists who are currently in academia is I get a sense of, I don't know, like unsureness, or maybe I'm not qualified, or this isn't for me, or I'm not like 100% a fit or whatever. And I would say, I think it's easy, I think, within the academy to get a sense of if you haven't established maybe a, you know, a strong, you know, reputation for a certain thing already, or you haven't uncovered absolutely every single rock like we're trained to do when we write a research paper, and acknowledge every little thing that maybe is outside of the scope of whatever we've researched, that I think lends itself to thinking, oh, well, then I'm not qualified to speak on this thing. And I would say, like, definitely set that aside. You are absolutely an expert in whatever it is that you do. And there's always going to be someone who knows maybe more than you or more than, you know, your peers or whatever. But that might not be the case when you go into an interview room. You know what I mean? Like when I sit in a room full of other technologists, I'm not a phonetician, no, but I am the person in the room who knows the most about the intersection of phonetics, society, and technology in that room. I may not be the most expert person out there. There's certainly sociophoneticians where I'm like, well, shoot, I don't know anything about, you know, pick your particular variant that you want to talk about and have written a dissertation about. No, I don't know any about those things, but I do know enough to be able to guide the product in the direction of our users. So think about yourself as an expert. And if you're not comfortable with that, then just put it on a shelf for a moment and just talk to the people, and it will come out to them that you're an expert. But like, yeah, own it. You know what you're talking about. You certainly know more than the people who you're interviewing with. And I think if you lead with, what does this mean for your business? What does this mean for your product? And then you can sort of sneak in little explanations about how you know that this could potentially result in a positive or negative thing for those aspects, then yes, that makes you an expert.
Fabulous, thank you. And I'm seeing a lot of +1s on the chat with regard to many of your comments here, not just Greg, but the whole group. So I want to thank you all for coming together. And I want to remind the audience that we picked a very narrow segment of technology and linguistics to be able to focus on one theme among people who have similar but not identical jobs and domains. We could have picked psycholinguistics. We could have picked 16 other specializations within linguistics and found you 3 or 4 people who could talk to how a linguist plays well with game development or with learning applications or designing video systems like Zoom. And, you know, so we could get a lot of different ways to figure out how technology and linguistics goes together. And we just chose one small segment for today. And I appreciate everybody's willingness to jump in here and share your experiences and to be open to contacts from the participants in this group, 70 and more people who are here. And also, I want to draw everybody's attention to the chat again, because the SIG, Linguistics Beyond Academia, is planning other activities during the LSA. And especially we hope that all these panelists, as well as the ones who are going to be speaking on Monday, will join us on Wednesday for a more informal chance to have a one-on-one with people. So if you had a question that I said not in this session or we didn't get to from the chat, please show up on Wednesday, because you can ask the same question of a lot of people and see how many different answers you get or how uniform the answers are. So I think you can do an experiment on Wednesday by interacting with 6 or 10 linguists. Emily's putting that reminder in the chat again. We're also speculatively considering doing a summer program that could expand on several of these topics. And so we have a quickie, a questionnaire to get your interest in that summer activity. We've got a lot of ideas that we want to implement, but we don't know whether those are going to fit with what our audience. So before we go and plan everything, we'd like to get a little feedback from you all. And so that's what I've got to say for today. And I thank Greg Bennett of Salesforce and Anton Goebel of Secret Startup and Briel from, what are you from? You're Chatbot, right?
From Botmock.
Botmock. I got almost all the letters right. Botmock. And a small startup which now has 6 employees. Hurrah, congratulations.
Thank you.
For joining us here today at this panel. And with a brief transition, we're going to go into the next hour, which is going to be led by, I think, Laurel and Alexandra. I can't remember who are going to be the components for that one. And we're going to focus on people who found employment in nonprofit organizations. And then on Monday, midday California time, we have a one more panel of potpourri of linguists in industry. And so thank you all for showing up. And Chris, thanks for adding to the chat there and being my backup. I appreciate it. See you all in about 10 minutes, right?
Correct.
Thanks for all the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was fun.
Yes. Thank
I'm
you for
happy to
hosting
hang
us.
around for a few minutes too, if anybody has more stuff.
Sure.
Likewise.
And there was a question sometime during that about naming companies. So I wanted to just quickly respond because that's my deal. So I founded a naming company about 20 years ago, and I've been working there ever since. And I have to say, I'm a little surprised that there aren't more linguists involved in naming. You'd think there would be, but there aren't. And I think linguistics and naming is a fantastic fit. I'm the only linguist at my company. My other partners are MBAs and have various different backgrounds, which I think is very good to get just a variety of views on what goes into naming. But naming is a lot of things. It's not just linguistics, right? It involves understanding business strategy and the brand of the company for which you're developing the name. It involves a lot of research on availability, which means you have to learn about trademark and about domain names and all those sorts of things. This is Laurel Sutton that I'm talking right now to whoever just asked. My company is called Catchword. So it's just pulling in many things to develop these names. And it's not just, as many people think, if they watched Mad Men, you go to a bar and you write down 5 names on a napkin and then you decide, oh, this is the best one. It doesn't work that way anymore. Maybe it did in the 50s, but now developing a name takes a lot of effort to come up with something that's both appropriate for the company, that expresses what they want about the brand, that is appropriate for their target audience, whoever they're trying to reach, and that is also available for them as a trademark. So in our business, we develop like thousands of names and we narrow it down and we do trademark screening, and then we present them to the client so that they have a number of names to choose from, and then jointly we hone in on what's actually going to work for them. And
you could tell us a couple of product names that we might be familiar with?
Oh, sure. So we named Asana, which is a company that you guys might be familiar with. I love that name. It's one of my most favorite names that we've developed. We named Refreshers for Starbucks, sort of an obvious name for that particular product. We named oh gosh, there's just a lot of things. It's like hard for me to remember them all because we're involved in naming projects right now for things that haven't happened. But we've worked with startups and we've worked with huge Fortune 50 companies. The process is the same no matter who you're naming things for. I think linguists are particularly well suited because I use my linguistics both when I'm doing name development, but I also use it when I am presenting to clients because it's just like teaching. You're in a class, you're trying to express what you need to express, and you're taking your expert linguistic knowledge. You're not dumbing it down exactly, but you're presenting it in a way that people who aren't linguists can understand. This was echoed several times by our panelists in both sessions. You have to learn how to talk about linguistics to non-linguists. That's very important. It took me a while to do that because I started off by like lecturing to a boardroom full of people, and like that doesn't work at all. And also, I have a good sociolinguistic background. Being able to suss out things like power differentials at companies and the way people are interacting with you is super important. And that can really determine how a project is going to turn out, right? If you're not sensitive to those things, you can torpedo a relationship with a client or with the company that you're working for. You have to understand how to interact with people, whether they're in the United States. We do a lot of work in Europe and in Asia, and that's a totally different thing. Like I had to learn how to interact with people in Korea, right? That it's just a different way of interacting, and it's not better or worse, it's just different, and you need to figure that out. So I feel like I use my linguistic training every day in everything I do. There are a number of naming companies. My company's small. We only have like 6 people. There are bigger companies that do internships. They hire people who don't have any background in naming because most people don't have background in naming. It's like such a niche thing. But I encourage people to look for positions in marketing, to look for internships at naming companies, and work your way into naming if that's a thing that you want to do.
Thank you. Okay, I think, what's the time for the next session starting? 20
We have
after?
very shortly. So I want to make sure all my panels to her. I see
And then we can
Mackenzie
take ours away.
Price, yes, and I see Sean. Sean, did you want to put your camera on? There you are. Hey.
And I'm going to take my camera off. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Yeah, and there's one more person in this panel, Bill Marcelino, and I don't see him here, and I hope that he is able to attend. So I'm just going to give him another minute and see if he shows up. Maybe he might be a little bit late, but if he doesn't, we'll just proceed with you guys.
I just got an email that he's having trouble logging in.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
That might have been the same problem that we were having earlier in the day with some of the panelists connecting. So hopefully, Kyle, you can see maybe Bill is in a waiting room or something like the problem
he
we had
says,
with Alan.
yeah, apologies everyone for this. It says, I'm unable to join. The link, I'm getting a webinar has expired note. So Kyle, if you could maybe send him something. I'm gonna try to send him the link that came in the email. Apologies, everybody. Since this is the last panel, we might run over a little bit. I don't know if everybody has to run off to do other things, but if we go a few minutes over, maybe that's okay.
Laurel, Sean, it's very nice to meet you.
Yes, it's
nice to meet you too.
It's great for you guys to join. As we've been saying, thank you so much for giving up your time on a Sunday to come and talk to people. It's been really great so far. We've had a lot of chat in the chat room that's over there. And so I'm just going to try to pull up the important questions that we're hearing. And some people have also been raising their hands for Q&A as well. Just to say again, we're having a mixer on Wednesday, and we've been putting some links in the chat about this. The mixer is a much more informal type of gathering through a platform called Gather, and it's meant to be more of a one-on-one or a one-on-several type of meeting. So it's not like this where people are presenting. It will be just chatting with individuals, other career linguists, doing networking. It's going to be a great networking event, and that's going to be for 2 hours in the middle of the day on Wednesday. And if you want the links, you can see we're just putting all that stuff in there. But it should be fun. And there's a career panel tomorrow as well, which is a more general discussion from linguists about their jobs, their paths to get there. We've been focusing today on different aspects of industry. This is going to be our nonprofit panel. The people tomorrow are from they have different degrees and they're in different industries. So it's more like a pan industry panel.
And I just mumbled something to myself on mute. And I said, one of the people in tomorrow's panel is actually going to talk about her nonprofit work, even though she's got a job for a paid company. Sorry, she has a paid job with a law firm. I should say it that way.
Okay, so we're just waiting. Hopefully Bill will be able to join us. Well, let me just do a little bit, excuse me, of the intro. So our last panel today is talking with folks who primarily work in nonprofit, although of course we want to hear about your career path and the other for-profit jobs that you may have had leading up to this and what your career path might look like after it. Hey, there he is. Hey, Bill, so glad you were able to make it. Great. So here are our three panelists. We're going to get started right now. And as before with the other panelists, what I'd like to do is to ask each of you in turn to talk a little bit about your career path from academia to where you are now. If you can just take a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. So Sean, can I ask you to go first?
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me. Thanks for setting this all up. My name's Sean Isamu Johnson. So my background is in linguistics. I got my undergraduate degree from UC Santa Cruz in linguistics, and then I got my master's in forensic linguistics from Hofstra University. I just graduated with my master's last spring, so 2020. And I became interested in plain language during my graduate degree. I'll talk about this more later, but I really bounced around a lot. I was interested in sociolinguistics and theoretical linguistics and corpus linguistics. And I eventually became interested in plain language, and the plain language world kind of sucked me in. I wrote my thesis on plain language and then just kind of accidentally committed to that path. And then I got a job at a Center for Civic Design as a contractor in August of last year. And I was just hired full-time as my role is a civic designer, researcher, and plain language lead.
Awesome. Hey, congratulations on the, the hiring. That's awesome. There's a couple things you mentioned that I want to come back to, but I would like to go around and get other people's talk. So Bill, can you talk about your path?
Yeah, sure. Hi. So Bill Marcelino, I'm a senior behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation. So I do public policy work across a range of areas, some things like health and education, mostly though national defense and national security issues. I came to get a doctorate later in life. So I had a whole prior life as a US Marine Corps enlisted officer. Years later, I'd already had an English degree in undergraduate. I had an English degree for the heck of it, master's. I got my PhD later in life at Carnegie Mellon University, and my PhD is in rhetoric at an English department. However, my coursework looked like corpus linguistics work, sociolinguistics, and field work in ethnography, discourse analysis. And my doctoral dissertation actually was a field ethnography. I lived with US Marines for 7 months and did an ethnography of communication. And anyways, when I graduated, I didn't want to go into the academic world. I ended up going into the public policy research world. So I kind of transitioned from being a rhetoric person and I guess trained as a linguist to a social scientist at RAND. Over.
Great, thank you. And Mackenzie, let's hear about yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mackenzie Price. I'm zooming in today from Washington, D.C. I I'm a language strategist and messaging and communications consultant for not exclusively nonprofit organizations, but mostly nonprofit organizations. And I've worked both serving nonprofits and inside of nonprofit organizations of various types. So direct service, research, more think tanky, across different parts of my work history. As a linguist, I am an interactional sociolinguist, but I've lived a couple of different linguist lives. So I was a variationist at one point. I also, there's a deep part of my heart that is all about African-American English and thinking about how that's traveled through the Black diaspora across the world. I've done discourse analysis and different types of discourse analysis. My dissertation was both conversation analysis and ethnography of communication in terms of other parts of linguistics that I'm interested in. I think, the most excited about framing and narrative, but of course, I'm really interested in question asking and advice giving as kind of different types of interaction. And I pursue all of those interests in working with nonprofit organizations that have framing and messaging difficulties. So for example, I've been doing a lot of work lately that's around policing and policing reform. And so how can you use framing to think about something like a conversation about police funding an organization, which you might recognize as the defund the police conversation. And you might be wondering if my work is about like, should we call it that or should we call it something else? But there's more to it than that. And some of what we might think of as a conflict about that is a question of framing and how frames work and who they work for. So those are some of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis as a linguist.
It sounds like your work is very intersectional, that it draws together a lot of threads and things that interest you personally.
Yes, things that interest me personally and are an important part of justice in this world.
Yeah, that's awesome. How is it in Washington today? Things okay?
Well, truthfully, I just got here. I was not in DC this week, but the sun is shining, and I just got here.
Okay.
I've been away.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody is well aware of what's been going on. So Sean, just to flip back to you for a moment, could you talk a little bit about your training in forensic linguistics? I'm not sure that the people who are attending know what that is. And I know we have a couple other forensic linguists who are attendees today. So if you could just say a few words about what that was and what the degree entailed.
Sure. So I think while I was doing the graduate degree, it occurred to me that there are kind of two ways of looking at forensic linguistics. I think the more traditional and narrower way to define it is like looking at language as evidence. So anytime when there are like confessions in a case, or anytime where like language needs to be analyzed in the context of a criminal case. But then more recently, I think that the definition has expanded to mean any time that like language and law intersect. And I was more interested in that version of forensic linguistics. So during my graduate degree, I became interested in this branch of law and linguistics that used corpus linguistics to try to get at the heart of this question of what is like the ordinary meaning of laws. So using corpora to shed light on the question of what is the, on using it to like do statutory interpretation basically. But beside that, I think I became interested in plain language because there are a lot of interesting legal implications behind it. And I started to look at plain language as like a social justice issue. And I came across a lot of interesting literature that made me realize that by not using plain language, you're often excluding people from participating in government or participating in civic institutions. So my journey started by trying to find a connection between like my interests in social justice, but then also my interests in linguistics, and then going in through a forensic linguistics program, and then coming out of it, it kind of came full circle for me.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, cool. Bill, the work that you do at RAND, does that cross over with what Sean was just describing a bit?
A little bit, although it's interesting, for me, linguistic forensics is about linguistic matching to get machines to identify or to have a machine statistically or through machine learning identify either documents or authors. So for example, we do a lot of work where we build machine learning models or use something like confirmatory factor analysis to actually say like, hey, who's posting these things? Or teaching my students, for example, like one of my students had a great project recently where they did a linguistic forensics analysis of QAnon, the QAnon author, and was able to show really, really large variation between different movements of QAnon to different boards that suggests pretty strongly it's a different author, or someone with extraordinary control over lexicogrammatical stylistic elements, which are really hard to control. Like it's pretty easy to do topics. It's harder to do something like, stylistics. Anyways, so yeah, I think, is that that's your question, Laurel?
Yeah, no, that was great. And I was going to ask you to just elaborate a little bit on what you do day to day in your job. It sounds like it's a lot of corpus analysis.
Yeah, so I am the product owner for RandLex. So I realized quickly at Rand that I was a bottleneck for labor. I was the only, a linguist in Washington, D.C. means you speak like Farsi or Russian. So I was the only linguist at Rand. And so anything involving linguistic analysis, anything at scale using machines, even like discourse analysis, I was the only person to do it. So I've spent the last 6 or 7 years building a large scale, like a scalable analytics platform. So we've got like lexical level tests, like keenness and colloquy, word and context kind of stuff. So a lot of standard corpus analysis tests. Also stylistic stuff as well to identify like authors, genre, that kind of stuff. And then also machine learning and to make it usable. So like web-based, like anyone here could use this software because it's sort of scaffolded and built in. If you have sort of like general scientific knowledge or general researcher, you could use it. So that's a big part of it, is democratizing scalable language analytics. The other part is and this is maybe key for you all here in the audience, no one knows what discourse analysis is. Like when I walked into RAND, I'm like, I like to do some discourse analysis, please. They're like, what are you talking about? I sound like an idiot because I was not speaking their language. But when I said I want to do qualitative content analysis, everyone understood that. And like the fine point of like the hows and whys of discourse analysis versus the kind of what of content analysis, that's a fine point. So I guess what I'm getting at is that if you're able to translate some of the things that we do in linguistics that are specialized to the disciplinary language and find the correlates in general social science or in marketing or wherever that line up with that, so you can authentically do it, that it's credible, I can actually do this, that's a huge benefit. So the other chunk of my work is acting as a content or collecting qualitative data and then doing a variety of analytic methods, many of which look like linguistic methods. Over.
Okay. Mackenzie, can you talk a little bit too about which has come up many times today about the need to translate your linguistic skills into whatever people who aren't linguists can understand, right? Like saying discourse analysis, people don't get it. So you have to frame it as a different way. How do you do that in your job?
A lot of my day-to-day sounds similar to Bill's day-to-day. And also a point that I think was made in the last panel, which is thinking about power and how, and kind of the presentation of self, and also where interactions might be going off track. I do a lot of that. But to get to the core part of your question, how do you do that translation activity? So part of it is thinking about, at least for me, you don't have to translate everything, frankly. So what are the things that you do need to translate in order to kind of get to the next step? And sometimes that's why this matters. So you're making a case for your work. Sometimes it's process. Sometimes it's about, you know, here's why I need this specific tool in order to do this content analysis. So making those kinds of cases. And I think that I also draw on, you know, my background in doing a lot of graduate level teaching, right? To in terms of the explanation, or even kind of drawing connections between different parts of a project. I draw on that background a lot too in my day-to-day.
Interesting. I think that's something that people undervalue in themselves. Just generally speaking across these three panels, you know, all of us have had some teaching experience, I think, given our graduate school background. And that kind of experience is invaluable when it comes to presenting the work that we've done. And just what you were saying, Mackenzie, like drawing things together, explaining to people why something is important. And I know for me personally, I didn't think that was important when I started to work in industry. It was like, oh, I taught, that has nothing to do with business, but it is so important to be able to stand up in front of a group with confidence and say, here's why this matters, and here are the things that you need to understand. So for all of the students who are attending, you know, that's important that you can do that. And if you can do it in the context of a linguistics class, you can do it in the context of business as well. So put that up there as something that you know how to do. That's very, very important. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about how you guys found your jobs. So we can start again. So Sean, this job that you have now, you were saying you'd bounced around a lot and then you landed here. We've been hearing so often today that the way you get your jobs is through networking. So was it networking that got you into this job? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there was a conference at my university, or when I was doing my graduate degree. It was hosted by the law school at Hofstra, and it was a plain language for lawyers conference. So it was like mostly a way of like teaching lawyers how to use plain language and judges, and just a way of, it was primarily directed at lawyers. But I went anyway because I had free time, and I met a New York State Supreme Court justice there. And I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I really didn't know what plain language was, but I knew that I was interested in it, maybe like subconsciously, like even what I like to read in my free time, I tended to like simpler writing. So anyway, I met New York State Supreme Court Justice Lucy Billings there, and she basically offered me an internship on the spot. It was unpaid, but from there she introduced me to another judge, Judge Edwina Mendelson, also part of the New York State court system. And I worked for one of her offices called the Office for Justice Initiatives, and basically help them use plain language in everything from like jury instructions and judicial opinions, web content, even like internal emails and like memoranda and stuff, like these long emails, like FAQs that they had received. So that was definitely my foot in the door. And I kind of realized then that like this was probably worth pursuing. But I was still really ambivalent. I didn't really know if that was gonna, you know, like provide me with like any job opportunities. So I kind of committed to it, but I had one foot in and one foot out. And then eventually it was clear that that was a path for me.
Yeah, cool. Bill, what about you?
So both networking and me choosing to go out and compete for an internship for, well, a fellowship actually. So I went to RAND and applied for their summer associate program, which is a really cool paid fellowship. You work on projects in the summertime. You have to find a mentor and you have to work on projects. And so I did that actually 2 summers in a row, which is kind of unusual. I got to work on a range of national defense projects, suicide prevention for the military, behavioral health kind of stuff, really cool things. I got to use a lot of discourse analysis, corpus linguistics on a large range of on-bari interviews to make sense of a really, really large transcript set, that kind of stuff. And so that eventually led to my job at RAND. But then there was also a networking aspect to it. So I can remember when I went ABD, I wasn't ready to go to RAND yet. Didn't have my actual diploma yet. So my network I built at RAND included a lot of former U.S. Marines, and one of those Marines got me a job, or got me an introduction, and then I got a job with the Marine Corps as a contract behavioral scientist for a year while I was ABD. It's pretty cool. Got treated as a full scientist and got to do ethnographic work on marine resilience and suicide prevention.
Wow, oh, so interesting. How did you find out about the fellowship?
So I think I finished my coursework and done my midterms. What do you call it? Like my qualifying exams. I'm like, okay, I should probably think now about like jobs and that kind of stuff and where am I going to go. So I sat down, started Googling like internships, summer fellowships, and I just Googled all these ones, and I made a huge list. I went to my faculty and asked them if they had any recommendation on them. I sort of whittled it down and tried to sort them all by, sort of match. And in particular, I was like, this RAND one sounds amazing because I don't want to be in the academic world. I don't want to be a professor. And I do want to do important work, and I also don't want to do for-profit work. Not that that's wrong. I did not want to do for-profit work. And so it's at that point, you're kind of small little intersection to find what you want. And then I wrote to people. So I actually wrote to Laura Miller, who is a really senior and really important military sociologist. She's probably the leading female, like women in the military sociologist in America. And I wrote to her and said, hey, here I am. Here's what I want to do. Can I talk to you? And she ended up being my mentor and getting me as a summer associate. So I think not being afraid to reach out to somebody directly. And by the way, I get those emails all the time. I have grad students write to me constantly. Hey, what about this? Give me a recommendation. How do I do that? That kind of stuff. And I'm always open to talking to people. And I think for those of you who are students, I mean, maybe there's a jerk out there, but I think most people are willing to help you, give you some advice or whatever, hook you up or something like that.
Yeah, great. And so Mackenzie, I'm curious to know how if it was networking or other things, and then also, have you had the same experience as Bill? Like, do people ping you a lot about opportunities or advice or informational interviews?
They do. And, so networking is, of course, important. I think that there are at least two levels of networking, and both of them are important. So one is, no matter what, you have to reach out and talk to people, but you can reach out and talk to people about specific employment opportunities. And sometimes that looks like, I see you have a job posted and I'm not a good fit for that, but I'd love to talk to you about, X other thing. There's that kind of cold calling and talking to people. But then there's also the reaching out and saying, I want to learn more about what you do. I'm curious about this question that might come up. I think it comes up in your work. Can we talk about it? And then in those conversations saying, who else can I talk to further, to learn more about this? And so that kind of networking is purely about talking. Nowhere in there are you saying, it's purely about talking. And I think that both of those are two types of conversations that I have had in my networking journey, and both of those have led to different opportunities too. So it's not that, I think there are a lot of things you can talk about in those networking conversations. In terms of, and then another thing that when I think about people who reach out to me, people reach out to me in both of those ways. So can I talk to you about this specific opportunity, or how I could position myself for other opportunities, or can I talk to you more generally, and are there other people you could introduce me to? And then I also, in terms of, for my own work, one thing that was important for me is in addition to doing informational interviews, just going to other kinds of like public events, conferences, webinars, and especially as as the pandemic continues, a lot of a lot of conversations in fields have been driven, you know, onto platforms like this, onto Zoom. And so signing up for different listservs and just pursuing things that I've been interested in kind of gets you into rooms with people that you'd never met before. And that, I think, helps continue the process of networking, because you find new people to talk to, new questions that you might be interested in. So talk to people, reach out to people, and go to a lot of public discussions about stuff you think is cool.
Yeah, that's great advice. You're right. I think the pandemic has really pushed a lot of this stuff to forums that are more accessible in ways. Of course, you know, we all miss being able to talk to someone outside a conference in the hallway while we're having coffee. But the fact that you can now attend a big meeting every week if you want to is tremendous, and making yourself visible and making contact with people, I think, is super important. And one thing you guys have all said, and I think we heard it too from the other folks, is that it's important not to be afraid to contact people, right? You just have to do it. You know, Sean, you talked to a state Supreme Court justice, and Bill, you talked to, you know, the most important person in the area that you wanted to do. I feel, maybe you guys can address this a little bit. I feel like as academics, when we got our training in academia, we were taught to be a little bit afraid to talk to people. You know, you don't want to waste their time. You have a question about this, you're not going to go send Noam Chomsky an email because he's way too important and busy to talk to you. And in industry, it's just not like that. You know, you can reach out to people, they'll respond to you or not, but you don't feel bad about it, and you don't get a black mark against you for just reaching out and talking to people. So do you guys all feel that way? And have you had that experience of just like reaching out and seeing what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an important part of what you mentioned. People can get back to you or not, and that's okay. Like it's okay. You know, we're all just, there are people, you're a person, they might not get back to you, so write them again. You know, it's okay. So yes, I've experienced that.
That's great. Bill, do you feel that's the same way? Well, you did it, obviously. It worked for you. Sean, what about you? How much courage did it take to walk up to that state Supreme Court justice and say hi?
So I didn't know who she was. Everybody else in the room knew who she was because they were all lawyers and they had probably all argued cases in front of her, but I didn't know who she was. So that probably worked to my favor. So I wasn't really, she's a very small woman. So she's very unintimidating and she's very sweet and nice. So like, I didn't feel intimidated in that sense. But to echo Mackenzie's point, I definitely did, after I graduated, I kept a spreadsheet of every job I ever applied to, and I probably applied at 20 jobs in a few months, and I got just even a response from 3. I got 1 interview, and that was the job that I got. So to echo Mackenzie's point, sometimes like you can hit people up and sometimes they get back to you and sometimes they don't, and that's okay. And it's hard to not take that personally, but that's just like a reality.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's an important lesson for people to learn coming out of academia. On that topic, this is not specific to our area of nonprofit, but what do you think is the biggest difference for you between the academic environment and the industry? I'm calling it industry, even though it's nonprofit. Like, what stands out to you as the biggest difference that you had to learn when you were making that transition? Maybe Sean, you could start, and we'll go around again.
The first thing that comes to mind is like, especially as like a linguist, is that the audience is different. So I've been working on a white paper, and the audience for the white paper is legislatures. It's a white paper on how the bad design and bad language of ballot envelopes makes it like ripe for people to forget to sign. And so I came at that from a very academic point of view. I mean, I haven't even done that much academic writing, but it's really the only type of writing I know. And so I came at it from that point of view. And the director of Center for Civic Design, Whitney Quisenberry, who is brilliant, we had a lot of long conversations about what the effect of using certain like styles of writing is. So trying to use, and especially because the paper is about plain language, it was kind of hypocritical for me to not use plain language to talk about why plain language is so important. So that was a huge kind of shift, and I'm still learning how, like, even though I try to walk the walk and talk the talk when it comes to plain language, the academic side just kind of spills out sometimes because that's how I was trained. But I think finding like people that you really respect, there's somebody, maybe probably a lot of you know, somebody named Ginny Reddish. She's a very influential plain language and document design and UX person. Her full name is Janice Reddish, but she goes by Ginny, Ginny, I think. And she really does walk the walk. And when you read her papers, it makes it really clear that she really does like live and breathe plain language. So I think that that was really helpful for me to just like find people to like model myself after, in a sense.
What was the biggest difference? What was the biggest difference for you?
To me?
Oh, sorry, I think I got cut off there. Yes, Bill, sorry, yes.
Sure.
So
I
thinking
think,
about your past academia.
like Sean said, there's a big translation, I think, or shift for audience. So my audience is public policy makers. So it's senior officers in the military. It's general officers. It's combatant command commanders and their staffs. It's senior executive staff within the U.S. government. It's senior people at the State Department. So people in the intelligence community. I have to be able to go to them and give them insight into the possible choices they could make. I have to help them understand if you pull different public policy levers, what is likely to happen, which leads to a second part because they don't want to know about meth. I mean, they want to know that there's rigor, but they don't want to know how the sausage is made. They don't want to hear like some crazy, you know, academic genre of like, you know, like introduction literature. Like that's just crazy to them, right? They want to know, what should I do? Why should I do it? And what are the trade-offs? And can I trust you? A second part of that, I think part of that trust, that ethos issue is that I don't set priorities. My job is not to decide what we ought to do. I can, as a scientist, my job is to help, and my team, and by the way, it's never me. I work in truly interdisciplinary teams of people. Everything is a group effort, which helps produce more rigor, I think, by the way, because we have many, many people working together who have very different kinds of methodological and domain knowledge expertise that intersect. And that is, we can tell people what we think is likely to happen and why, and our relative certainty. But I don't set priorities of government. I don't set values. I don't set U.S. A policy, and that there's a kind of humility, I think, in understanding that I am not. If I want to do that, I should run for office. And then the last part of that, then for me, is all that being said, I also have values, and so I have no problem helping, say, the U.S. military. I don't want to work for Homeland Security. And I don't want to do work as a whole. I mean, maybe there would be something I would do. There's a range of activities for Homeland Security I don't want to do. And I'm lucky that I can pick and choose. But that's a really hard thing to navigate, is this idea that like in business or in, the public policy world, what do you do when you're asked to do work that you think might be misapplied? Or in my, by the way, I don't know, my criteria is like, look, I don't want to ever manufacture guns because guns are meant to kill. I know that a Louisville Slugger could be misused, but Louisville Sluggers are meant for baseball. So I'm okay with that. That's my like metaphor for how to pick these things. Over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I was thinking about my own experience in my company doing naming. We've been approached a couple of times by tobacco companies to name cigarettes, and we've just turned that down. Like, nope, we'll do a lot of things, but that's part of the line. And we have a very short list of industries that we absolutely would not work for, and that's one of them. So that just speaks to, again, in industry, you do get a little bit of the ability to pick and choose where you're going to work if you're able to. So Mackenzie, finally for you, I'm curious, as Bill was saying, he works on a team. Do you work on a team as well? Do you often do that, or do you work by yourself?
Both. In this exact moment, I am leading a couple of different teams, and that's the kind of consulting service that I'm providing. But I have, in previous roles, worked on teams, and that's something that I think is two things. I enjoy it, and also fitting into a team, sometimes designing a team, working with teams. These are skills that we can cultivate, and something that really matters, I think, in working in this field. And if I can, I want to draw a connection to what Bill was saying in terms of values, because I think this is really important for any kind of employment or engagement with the nonprofit sector. So these are organizations and institutions that have values, and we are people, we have values too. And I think in looking for where you want to be in this field, it's important to either seek out that alignment, or if the alignment isn't there, figure out how are you going to deal with that and deal with what that looks like every day. And there are a lot of different, there are also a lot of different types of nonprofit organizations. And when I say types, I mean anything from like their tax and reporting structure and like legal requirements to even how it is that they, if we think of nonprofits as something that serve, like what do they serve? So do they do research? Do they do direct service? Are they about fundraising? These are, there isn't a uniform kind of this type of organization. And so in looking, if this is a sector that someone wants to be a part of, just knowing that, understanding that, and looking for that alignment, I think is important, and frankly can save you a lot of heartache and stress at other points in your journey too. And then I also want to connect to this larger point of what the difference, or what was different when I kind of stepped into this field. And two things were really important. So one, knowing what it is that they're asking you for, like when someone comes to you knowing you're an academic or a former academic, they might ask you questions like, what should my priorities be? Or should I do X or Y? And is that really something that you want to answer for them? You can, knowing, being able to spot the difference between what people are asking you for and what you can reasonably provide them, so you can help them understand trade-offs. You can give them a sense of the wider history or story behind something. There are different ways that you can answer people's questions. And some of the way that I think about that is asking, what service am I here to provide? If this is a labor market, what service am I providing? Am I looking up stuff for you? Am I managing a project for you? Am I a writer? Am I reviewing somebody else's writing? Am I, and so I think that was a big difference. I think as an academic, I was am, trained to go really deep on any question you ask me. And, I can still do that, don't get me wrong, but that's not necessarily what I'm being asked for on a day-to-day. And so what service am I here to provide is something that I ask myself a lot and had to learn how to ask myself.
Yeah, it sounds like, especially for nonprofit, there's sort of two layers to it, right? There's the desire to want to work for a company that serves, as you were saying, but then there's also layered on top of that, well, what area do you want to serve in? Sean has chosen sort of law and public policy mixed together, whereas somebody might choose a different way to go depending on what that company might do. So let's stay with you for a second, Mackenzie. This is a great transition to some of the more practical advice. So if somebody really wants to work at a nonprofit, what kind of advice, practical advice, would you give them? Like, where do you look? Do you just Google for jobs, or do you look on LinkedIn? Are there keywords that are really important to help you find opportunities that are out there? Obviously there's networking, but if you're just getting started, maybe what are the top 3 things that you would do?
I think that you can in fact Google like nonprofit jobs. You can also, but I think even before you get there, I would say why do you want to work at a nonprofit? And what I would be looking for in that why is there a specific like issue or set of issues that you are interested in? And if that's the case, then so if you are interested in, you know, let's stick with what's top of mind for me. If you're interested, I want to work on a nonprofit that's focused on policing reform. Well, then that is that's a more definable space, and you can find roles that are in that space. Or if you want to be a maybe you're not interested in a particular issue, but you're interested in fundraising. I want to be a fundraiser. So then your job search is about looking for jobs in development and development offices. And so that's kind of one way to narrow the bounds of what you're looking for. So the first question I would ask is why? And then, you know, for anyone who is interested in, who wants to specifically do communications or marketing work for nonprofit organizations, and I say that because that's the space that I know the best, then there are, I think, a big way that employment opportunities get circulated are through different listservs. So one of them is called RADCOMs, which stands for Radical Communicators. And so that's a listserv of nonprofits and circulating jobs that are about communications for like this kind of sector. So that's I think one way you can kind of get a feel for what kinds of opportunities are circulating. And I'll put the name of the listserv in the chat.
Great. Alex has also mentioned idealist.org, which is a listserv for nonprofit jobs and orgs. And yeah, there it is. Now we have the link. I know that people have often recommended usajobs.gov for government jobs. Bill, is that like the right place to go? Are there others besides that, or is that it?
I think actually LinkedIn can also be good. Glassdoor can be good, but definitely I would use the jobs.gov.
Okay. And Sean, any others to add to that? Were there things that you found useful? You said you had this spreadsheet of all these jobs. How did you find all those jobs that you applied to? Was it networking, Google searching, LinkedIn, all of the above?
Well, a lot of those that were mentioned, I definitely use like LinkedIn. What else? Indeed. I set up like an alert so you can like, when new jobs come up with certain keywords, then you can have them emailed to you. Besides that, I think, yeah, I Googled a lot. Yeah, beside that, I don't think anything else.
Okay. And I know that this is something that we hear all the time. Most of the jobs that we all have don't have linguist in the title, right? Nobody is hiring linguists for what we do, although linguistics is a core part of what we all do. So what are the other words that you would look for? Obviously language, right? Like if it says something about language, or for Mackenzie's area, it would be like marketing or branding, or maybe copy or discourse analysis. Even might be discourse analysis, I'm not sure. So can you guys think of other words that might be specific when people are looking? So they're typing into Google and they're going nonprofit, job, law. What comes next? What do you do to narrow that down?
I think there are a lot of jobs that are looking for, a lot of institutions are looking for researchers. They're looking for different level researchers. They may specify
and analysts,
or unless they often specify qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method. And so while most of those jobs, they're used to sociologists, anthropologists, and psychologists. That's the three disciplines they're used to recruiting from for these jobs. But if you're a linguistic anthropologist, you're an anthropologist. If you have sociolinguistics and ethnography training, that's, that's close enough, right? So I think it's possible to translate and represent the skills and the methods that we learn. Also methodology, right? Because having method skills and domain knowledge is important. being able to design a research study and to do methodological coherence in research activities, that is a non-trivial skill and important as well. And so being able to represent that in your work, I think is important.
Cool. Sean, other thoughts?
I definitely sympathize with people conflating like being a polyglot with being a linguist, because like even within my family, they're just like, oh, how many languages do you speak? So yeah, I definitely ran into that problem. Definitely research. I think that's how I found my job. I started to try to like pick up other skills after I graduated, or even toward the end of my, before I graduated, I tried to learn some programming. That didn't really pan out for me. I became interested in UX a little bit. So I started reading a little bit more about UX, and I found that it was kind of compatible with what I valued in my graduate career, like doing research and like speaking to people and understanding people. I will say that I think, especially during like a pandemic, when most people, at least when the job starts, will start remotely, you should turn location off maybe. A lot of times, like you'll put like your location and you really like narrow your job search. So maybe just like not putting a location, and sometimes it'll be like based in Seattle when you're in New York, but it'll be entirely remote and the filter doesn't catch that. And then also analyst, I definitely used that as a search term too.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's all really good.
Laurel, can I give one more sort of job thing?
Oh, absolutely.
So when I tell my students to get ready for the job market, I tell them more than anything else, having high quality method skills and being able to articulate that plausibly. I can do, because like, look, when you hire somebody, like no one wants to, it's going to be hard for you to find someone else to hire you because you care about like sustainable food sources. That's just not what someone wants to hire you for. But they want to hire you to do mixed method quant analysis, to do data visualizations. This is a lot of things. It's like filling a roster slot on like a baseball roster. So the more skills you have, then you can sort of give evidence that I took coursework, I have like a portfolio, I did a publication on this kind of stuff. That's valuable. The second thing, and this is hard because we have interests, we have things we passionately care about. What I've seen is that like my dissertation was on how U.S. Marine Corps officer acculturation linguistically affects their political representation and their interactions with Congress. It was really easy for people to see how my work would translate to other public policy issues. I've had friends that did research that was very important to them and they loved and cared about, but it looked, it did not translate outside of the academic work. It looked like, and I want to be careful. I heard the word though. I've heard people say, I don't want to hire someone who's doing me search. And I want to be careful about that because we have passionate, feelings and values. And this research, we can do things that don't directly translate to other areas and see how they add to human knowledge and do bear fruit. But if you want to get hired for a nonprofit that wants to hire you to do X, Y, and Z, they may not see that. So that's an important consideration. Over.
That's great. Sorry, go ahead.
To add. I just in thinking about how it's a whole other kind of study to think about how the different types of positions that are available get framed and presented. And so I think a lot of many organizations also in the nonprofit sector, like they are looking for researchers, they're looking for analysts, and sometimes those positions are like, to Bill and Sean's point, like looking for positions that say like research analyst, mixed methods, research analyst, that's important too. There are also organizations that have borrowed the organizational structure of like consulting organizations. And so you'll see positions that are offered in this associate, senior associate, principal, different types of program officers kind of framework too. And so those are all different types of positions that you could be looking for. And so, and of course, there's also like the piece of the sector that is nonprofit consulting and not just borrowing the organizational structure of consulting firms.
Mhm.
So that's other positions to be on the lookout for too.
That's great. And this leads into something that I think people would love to know, given that a lot of the folks who are attending today are students, they're still working through their degree program, whatever that is. Do you have specific recommendations for coursework that they should take to give them these skills? So obviously, whatever kind of courses will give you some research opportunities or analytics or statistics or things like that. Are there other courses, obviously dependent on what your interest is? So if you were really interested in law, it might be good to take some courses that will give you a grounding in that. But are there other sort of pan interest courses that you would recommend people take while they're still working on their degrees? Anybody can go.
Yeah, so I would say data visualizations. If you can learn to do Tableau or some other way of representing data usefully, that's incredibly important skill and really would make you stand out in a crowd. Another one is coding skills. If you can learn Python or R, although my general sense is that R is more for the person that does their own ad hoc mad scientist work on their laptop. Python is more amenable to enterprise level sort of, but that's my best sense. But if you can do web scraping with Python, if you can build simple machine learning kind of models, if you can handle data at scale using Python or other coding means, that's important. So I think anything that shows that you can handle data in a world where we are getting more and more data available to us is going to help you differentiate yourself.
Yeah, that's great.
And I would say, even if you, I completely agree. Those are the things that I also would name. And for anyone who might be having palpitations about, oh, MG, I have to learn how to use R. Like, I tried it once, it didn't really go well. That's okay. What another thing that is important is being able to, this gets back to the question about teamwork. Can you work with someone who is the R, if we're using R as an example, the R expert here? Can you work with that person? Can you work with the output of the R script that someone else on your team is creating? And that is a skill that you pick up in these kinds of classes and coursework as well. So it's not that you need to be the best programmer out there, but can you work with, can you work on the team? That also really matters and is something that one, you can speak to in interviews, and frankly, that's a question that people are looking for, not just the person who's the expert, but the person who can work with the expert. And someone will ask you, it's okay in an interview to say, I'm not, an expert at this, but I'm familiar with applying it in these ways. That's a skill too.
Mm-hmm. Sean, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Mackenzie's point about I had that anxiety about learning coding, oh, I don't know. I've spent hours and hours on this Code Academy course and I still don't know anything about it. But I do. I know more than I did before I started. And that's probably, hasn't yet, but I imagine that will come in use one day. Mm-hmm. And besides courses, I think, for me, that Plain Language conference I went to was really, that really started it for me, if there was a moment where it started. And if you're still in grad school, there's a good chance that there are a lot of things going on your campus that maybe they are at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Friday and you don't want to go, but you might want to think about going, saying yes to as many of those types of opportunities, because once you leave grad school, then you really you're not on the same email lists anymore, and you're just not gonna have those, this was back before the pandemic, but when you hear things in the hallway and stuff, and oh, there's a conference, you see a flyer for something. Those are, I think, besides coursework, I think saying yes to those types of things are usually good. And then also asking for money from your program if you can. There were cases where I went to a conference in Austria and the program funded that, and I wouldn't have gone if it weren't for that. So seeing what funding is available if you are in that type of grad program, if they'll pay for you to go to a conference, then definitely go.
Yeah, you have to ask. They're not going to offer to you. You got to ask.
Exactly.
One other thing, and it may not be a course, but the ability, gaining and demonstrating leadership expertise. So I'm a principal investigator. I for most projects, I know from $500,000 to $2.5 million budgets. I have teams of people that work for me, and while I'm a senior person, I started off as a task leader, then be a co-PI, and then finally a PI. So if you can show through other experience, through demonstrated work somewhere in your academic career, that you are capable of leading teams of people to collaborate productively, that's pretty powerful for some people that want to hire.
Totally agree. And I would add one more thing to that, which is if you have the opportunity to take a course that helps you with your presentation skills, do that. And I mean, both standing up in front of a group of people and learning how to talk, if you don't do that already, if you don't have the teaching experience, but also putting together a really kick-ass PowerPoint presentation, because you need to know how to do that. You really do, to take all this data, to distill the points to it, to put it into a presentation that is pleasing to look at, that people can understand, and that is likely going to be handed around without you there to explain it. And that's something that took me a long time to learn. We're sort of used to voicing over our work all the time as we're presenting, like in this kind of format where you're giving a paper and you're talking through slides. You really, really have to figure out how to get it into a format where people can read it and understand it and not come away confused. And I know a lot of universities have classes, but even you can take classes like that on LinkedIn, and there's other free places that will teach you how to do it. It's not easy. Like, PowerPoint skills are harder than you think they are. And having that in your pocket is fantastic. We have a question from the audience here, which is, do you usually need to submit writing samples for the kinds of jobs that you all have on this panel? Is it too late if during our academic career we haven't done much research that would be applicable or interesting to employers? Like if we have had relevant coursework or believe we have skills, but none of the research writing we have produced is appealing outside of theoretical linguistics. Thoughts on that?
So like I had to do a job talk where I presented research in a way that was of interest, that showed both my academic and scientific chops, but also showed I could translate and talk to a policy audience, which is not easy. And part of my application was also a writing sample. I think the writing sample, it doesn't have to be like about the place you're applying to. It's because you can see, hey, someone can write rigorously, they can do good work. But I guess like it's probably going to be hard if you've done like something like I don't know, like a humanities piece or fiction, how to translate well. But I think it has to be the exact subject area you're applying for.
Okay.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have to be the exact subject area, and it can also be you can use the things that you have written and maybe reformulate them. So, for example, like, yeah, I wrote a dissertation. I do not send that, never have sent that whole thing to someone, but I have sent people a summary of turned one of my chapters into a one-pager, right? So that's a writing sample. I wrote it, giving you a sample, voila. But in all seriousness, it doesn't have to be the exact subject matter. You can, and when people are asking you for a writing sample, you can create different types of, you likely have created different types of products, like written products across your career. And so, and across your academic career. And so I think maybe thinking a little more expansively about what have I written, what different formats are out there. And honestly, if you are unsure about, what you want to send things of different types, and you can send them two things too.
That's great. Sean, anything else on that topic?
Yeah, I thought it was funny, like the idea of sending like a 100-page dissertation is quite a flex, and no one's going to read it anyway. So that's pretty good advice. For me, So part of what we do at Center for Civic Design is we design forms, like more accessible forms, and we take insights from good design and plain language to make forms easier to read and harder to mess up, basically. And when I was interning at this Office for Justice Initiatives, my boss, who was a law clerk, basically said, we're working on this form. If you want to take a stab at it, go ahead. We probably won't use whatever you come up with, just because there's like a very long legal process that you'll be long gone before any of this even gets talked about. But if you want to, go ahead and take a stab at it. And so I did, and I gave it back to him, and we really never talked about it again. And I kind of forgot about it. And when I applied for my job, part of the job description was like looking at forms. And I was like, oh, I did that. And it's definitely better than the original form, but I didn't really I basically kind of jumped into the deep end with form designing, and I knew I was like interested in it, but I didn't really know how to do it. So I just like took a stab at it. So maybe I'm like reframing the question as like, not what writing sample should you send, but like, what should you write? Like maybe if you're interested in blogging, write some blog articles, because that is a skill and that could be really useful, especially at a nonprofit where they're looking for really diverse skill sets. I don't do blog writing, but I wish I did, because there are 7 people at CCD and one of us has to do it. Nobody specializes in that. So things like that, like maybe if you have like this inkling of like, I want to write that type of thing, or like Mackenzie said, like a summary, like that's a really good skill, like being able to summarize something. And people will not only look at like the content of what you wrote in that summary, but also like, oh, that's really great that they can take something that's like several hundred pages and condense it to 1 page.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. I always say to people, just write, like keep writing, because you get better at it the more you do it. And the more writing you do, the more writing samples you'll have. And the more different types of writing you do, the more fluent you'll get in them. So you should always be writing something, I think. As we're starting to wrap up, I wanted to ask you guys, because I'm sure this is top of mind question for our students, what are prospects looking like for jobs in nonprofits, given our extremely turbulent times? Any, inklings on that?
Go ahead.
Mackenzie, go ahead.
I have an inkling. There are lots of different inklings, and I think that I understand why there is trepidation, but at the same time, there are still opportunities. So I am not a person who thinks and sees that there's a dearth of opportunity and hiring. From where I sit, I see that it's happening and people are creating new roles or looking to fill existing roles. So I see a lot of jobs out there, and in all of the different platforms that we've discussed and the listservs we've discussed, like as I've been sitting here, I've gotten 3 open job opportunities through the RadComs listserv that I mentioned. So on a Sunday, people are saying that there are jobs available. So to answer your question, I think there is a lot of opportunity. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think it will continue just based on the evidence that I kind of see in my inbox.
That's great. Bill, you were going to go.
Yeah, so I would say there are still opportunities available, although I think it's gone down. I mean, I've definitely seen, I know that most of the FFRDCs, the federally funded research development corporations, the large, sort of partnership ones in the DC area, I think all of them have shed some labor right now. And I think there's more I think there is hiring. I think it's very targeted. So, well, they hired me. I'm like some kooky guy with a rhetoric degree. Like I have like the dumbest, PhD in the world. I got hired kind of on a flyer. It worked out. I see now people with data skills, sort of like skills that people can absolutely see fill the affect the bottom line and are going to help them be productive, either pulling in money or effectively meeting their contract obligations. So again, I think that speaks to wanting to make sure there's opportunities. You really want to make sure, one, that you are able to plausibly present yourself as having valuable skills, and two, really thinking carefully about how you represent yourself so that you're speaking. And I think you might have 8 different CVs. You might really think carefully about crafting every single cover letter, piloting it with people. So contacting people, the last thing you want to do is send a cover letter that signals something that's the wrong thing. You have the best intention, but you didn't use the language and the framing and even the order, the scheme that's going to make sense. So I just think you have to really take your shots very, very carefully, thoughtfully, with a lot of diligence, and make the most of them. Over.
That's great advice. Great advice. Sean, and what about in your sector? What do you think? Public policy, civic design stuff.
So Center for Civic Design's bread and butter is elections. So definitely not a boring field right now. And there, from what I understand, is a lot of funding happening right now. I didn't know any of this going into it. I didn't really know anything about elections before I worked at CCD. So I think that just going back to networking, that's probably a good question to ask when you are networking, when you do connect with people. What is it like? What is it like compared to a year ago? How much has the pandemic impacted this? For some fields, the pandemic has made things better for some fields, right? And it's kind of a weird irony, but that's just the reality in some cases. And I hate making this point because I think it's so unfair, but I think that taking unpaid internships is, I was able to do that. My wife was working while I finished my graduate degree. So I hate pushing that because I hate that idea of unpaid internships. I think it's really, it's unfair, to put it lightly. But I did it because I was able to do it. So if you can do it, then you should. And if you can't, then I sympathize with how unfair that system is.
Yep, totally agree. Totally agree. So we are just coming up to time. This has been an amazing conversation. You guys have been fantastic, and I thank you so much for your time. I think they're going to shut the room in a second. So this has been recorded, and we are going to be making it available at some point for people outside of the attendees for LSA. The LSA attendees will get to view it, I think, on the LSA website. We've been linking in the chat all the different resources that we have. We've got the career panel tomorrow, and then the mixer, which is on Wednesday. And if some of you are going to attend the mixer, panelists, that is, I'm sure there would be lots of people who would love to talk with you. And I would bet you're going to be getting LinkedIn requests from lots of the folks who attended today. So again, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic, and we are lucky to have you as our panelists.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you so much. Yeah, I learned a lot too. So thank you, and nice to meet everybody.
I think we all did.
Okay.
Be well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mackenzie.
Okay, Kyle, are you going to close?
That's why Spectrum Internet